All right, everybody, welcome to our QuaranSTREAM Answers for COVID-19. Today, we have chosen as a team that we're going to be talking about some of the serious matters impacting our country, and we will go over what we hope to be helpful information, some of the history, and ways to really understand what some of these challenges are and find our role within them, because it's our duty for all of us really to act. As always, I'm Abrar Omeish. I'm one of your members at large on the Fairfax County School Board. And I'm joined with?
I'm Kimberly Boateng. I'm the student rep on the school board.
And we also have?
My name is
go ahead.
My name is Nathan Onibudo. I'm a junior from South County High School, and I'm actually going to be next year's student rep to the Fairfax County School Board.
Very pleased to work with these two young folks. And we also have a number of student leaders with us who have also been passionate about this and wanted to make sure we put out the sense of urgency. So they'll go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Ritika. I go to Westfield High School and I'm a rising senior.
Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm a rising senior. I go to Thomas Jefferson.
My name is Kelly Bonilla-Guzman. I am a rising senior as well, and I go to Hayfield Secondary.
We're excited to have them on. And of course, today is a heavier topic. A number of us are wearing variations of yellow and black in support of what is the Black Lives Matter movement. That is going to hopefully launch us today into a discussion about what we're going to do in Fairfax County. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with a quote from Malcolm X, who of course was one of our civil rights giants and led a number of efforts during that period. So Nathan, we'll go ahead.
So Malcolm X told us that there is no better than adversity. Every defeat, every heartbreak, every loss contains its own seed, its own lesson on how to improve.
So as we reflect now, as a country, as a state, as a county, with the heartbreak of what is happening on the streets all across this nation, we think of how we're going to improve right here, right now. And we wanted to frame our conversation with that today. We're going to move forward to a quote by Martin Luther King, who really needs no description. So Kelly, go ahead, please.
MLK said, "First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, 'I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action,' who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of good will is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection."
Thank you, Kelly. And that further frames our conversation for today, to be mindful that our complacency, being complicit, actually contributes to these offenses, and that MLK and other activists of his time saw them to be a larger threat than even the KKK themselves. There are people who define themselves to be folks who are going to act for hate and devote their lives for that. But then there are the hundreds, the thousands, the millions who watch in silence as these offenses and injustices unfold. So I hope that today we can reflect on our role in all of this. And one of the things today, the NAACP had a call and was mentioned is, we often ask ourselves, what would we have done during the period of segregation, when there was slavery? What would we have chosen to do when they were, when there were people were riding buses and trying to make a statement about racism? Would we have been amongst those who were in the march on Washington? Or would we have been sitting back in our homes? And our answer is right here before us. Today is the day that you would have been doing what you're doing right now. Today is the opportunity to make a statement, to act, to move, to do something. And it's just in our modern context. So with that, before we proceed, I do want to make sure we hear the stories. Of course, we know there are tens over the years, hundreds of folks who have lost their lives to injustice in this country, really thousands. And 3 in particular, and we want to make sure we say their names as we know, because these are not just numbers, they're not just statistics. These are lives, individuals with families, with loved ones, who we should be able to see ourselves in. And so we'll begin, of course, with Ahmaud Arbery's story. So please go ahead.
So just as Abrar had said, we began this entire justice movement that has been going around lately. And the first story that we have to share is that of Ahmaud Arbery's. So for him, what had happened was that it had occurred on February 23rd, shortly after 1 p.m., where Arbery, an unarmed man, was shot and killed in Satilla Shores in Georgia. While on a job, Arbery had wandered into a construction site where neighbors Georgie McMichael, who was a former Glynn County police officer and former investigator with the local district attorney's office, and his son Travis McMichael, saw him jogging out and thought he looked like a man who was a frequent suspected trespasser. Something to note is that the McMichaels were legally carrying firearms under Georgia's open carry law, in that it was a handgun and a shotgun. They got into their white pickup truck and had chased Arbery down, up and down the road, unsuccessfully trying to cut him off, while Arbery was running, trying to practically save his own life. Whereas another neighbor during that event, Roddy Bryan, had attempts to help corner Arbery, but also takes a video on his phone. As Georgie is calling the police, Travis shoots the shotgun 3 times, and we know what happens after.
Next, we'll hear Breonna Taylor's story.
So Breonna Taylor. On March 13th in Louisville, Kentucky, a 26-year-old EMT, Breonna Taylor, was shot dead in her apartment. So Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend were basically just relaxing at their homes, as any of us should have the right to do. And the police used a battering ram to ram open the fourth entry into the apartment, and none of the 3 officers were wearing body cams. So Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, fired at the intruders because at that point, that's what they were. They did not identify themselves as the police. They were intruders, wounding one of them. And his shot was returned by several more by the police, at least 8 of which struck Taylor. The police were looking for a suspect that did not live in Taylor's house, and there are no narcotics found in Taylor's house.
And finally, George Floyd.
So George Floyd was a 46-year-old man from Minneapolis, Minnesota. On the evening of May 25th, he was arrested after allegedly using a counterfeit $20 bill to buy a pack of cigarettes from Cup Foods, a grocery store. The store clerk then called the police. After approaching the car, one of the officers, Thomas Lane, pulled out his gun and ordered Mr. Floyd to show his hands. Mr. Lane, prosecutors said, put his hands on Mr. Floyd and pulled him out of the car. Then Mr. Floyd actively resisted being handcuffed. It was when officers tried to put Mr. Floyd in their squad car that a struggle ensued. At around 2014 military time, Mr. Floyd stiffened up, fell to the ground, and told the officers he was claustrophobic, according to the report. For 8 minutes and 46 seconds, Mr. Chauvin kept his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck. The prosecutors, about 6 minutes into that period, Mr. Floyd became non-responsive. "I can't breathe, man," Floyd can be heard saying in the video. "Please, let me stand. Please, man." Chauvin was taken into custody on Friday afternoon, according to witnesses. 4 officers were involved in the incident, and all have since been fired from the Minneapolis Police Department. It's also worth noting that the officer did check Mr. Floyd's pulse, continued to keep his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck after not feeling a pulse for 2 minutes and 43 seconds.
With that, and of course, we understand that most of cases like this don't even receive the level of attention, nor level of prosecution, or personnel action that this one case did. So with that, we do want to take a moment of silence to reflect and to honor those whose lives were lost, who were not only individuals listed in the stories that were mentioned, but who were children of parents who loved them, who were parents themselves of children who relied on them, who were a sister or a brother to siblings who now have to live without them. And so we will take this moment to reflect. Thank you. Of course, we know that these victims, fall within the broader context of what's happening in our country, and that didn't come out of just a single day where we found ourselves here. So we want to, one of our student leaders will share with us some of the general facts about the conditions in this country, and that just because we're hearing of this, perhaps it's your first time hearing of something like this and seeing what's happening on the streets, that you know that it's actually something that's happening on a much more regular basis.
So here are some police brutality stats, and just as Abrar said, many people kind of dumbfounded by like what's been happening in this past couple of weeks. But it must be noted that this isn't a one-time occurrence. So in Virginia, out of the 124 people killed by police from 2013 to 2019, 52 of those people were Black. In DC, 26 people were killed by police from 2013 to 2019. 23 out of those 26 people were Black. There were only 27 days in 2019 where police did not kill somebody. Black people are 24% of the killed by police, but they only make up 13% of the population in 2019. Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by the police, despite being only 1.3 times more likely to be unarmed compared to white people. 8 out of the 100 largest police departments kill Black men at higher rates than the US murder rate. And for nationwide stats, African Americans are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of their white counterparts. If African Americans and Hispanics were incarcerated at the same rate as whites, prison and jail populations would decline by almost 40%. In terms of like the school, in terms of school, in the 2015-2016 school year, Black students represented only 15% of total student enrollment, but made up 35% of students suspended once, 45% of students suspended more than once, and 36% of students expelled. But the US Department of Education concluded that the disparity is not explained by more frequent or more serious misbehavior by students of color. There's actually many more for the nationwide and the local, like statewide, that I didn't cover, but just for the sake of time and for the sake of like not bombarding with too much information, I'm just gonna briefly go through a couple of Fairfax County stats. In Fairfax County, around 11.8% of Black people live below the poverty line, and 10.7% of those people lack health insurance. 31.2% of people living below the poverty line that are part of the Black population are employed full-time. The median earning of individuals in the Fairfax County Black population is $46,602, whereas the median earnings of Fairfax County for all populations is $60,000. So just like with the rest of the other statistics, I actually skipped a lot of them. So, but just for the sake of kind of continuing and not kind of overwhelming everyone with statistics, I do urge everyone to still read up on it. I urge people to look at the statistics because they're all there. But for the sake of time and for the sake of respecting all my colleagues' time, I'm just gonna give it back to, I'm just gonna let us continue.
Thank you, Kimberly. And the importance of the statistics highlight a number of things that I want us to think on. For our audience, folks who are tuning in because they just want to understand this issue better or they don't really know what to do. We started with that quote, of course, that amidst this heartbreak and amidst the despair, we can act. And this is our chance now to educate ourselves and to better understand these challenges so that we can take the steps that require years of effort and not just, short-term bursts of energy. I also want to touch on the fact that Kimberly read statistics in Fairfax County, right here at home. We take for granted the proximity of the issue. Oh, it's something in Minneapolis. Oh, it's something, that happens all across this country, but not right here. But our own communities suffer from this. And so we have to ask ourselves, How did we get ourselves here? Of course, there are distinctions and we want to be nuanced, but these are the facts, and numbers, facts don't lie. So given that situation, we have to try to think, how did we find ourselves in a circumstance where one of the most diverse counties in the country, where we take pride in the diversity that's here, we have people who speak more than 160 languages, people from every background we can imagine, but still we find ourselves where people of color, minorities, folks of particular backgrounds will be systemically disadvantaged, that your race can predict whether or not you have certain outcomes in our own community. We're talking our neighborhoods, folks. So with that, understanding that it's close to home and having to reflect on how on earth did we get ourselves here, we come to realize that the fact of the matter is we have come here because of a recipe that got us here. And that recipe is a long-standing history of how different communities have been treated in this country over time. So with that, I want to present what I hope to be our thesis from this conversation today. And I'm gonna give it to Lisa to actually go over a timeline of our history for us to just reflect on. We didn't just wake up one day and find ourselves in this America. This was built over time and a result of the complicit, I guess it's absent voices of the people who witnessed it as it unfolded and did nothing. So I'll start with the classic thing that I hear as someone who's a public servant. I'm not into politics. People who are we're often too preoccupied with what is in front of us, with our immediate needs, and for many of us, for good reason, trying to make ends meet and just putting food on the table. But those things can distract us from the realities of power and how power makes decisions and influences the situations around us, and who power represents and who power leaves out. So when we think even of our own elected officials or our engagement and our awareness of the issues that are happening, politics is not a hobby. For many of these communities, politics is what determines their viability to be treated the same in this community. So step number one for today is that we shake ourselves out of the, I'm not really a political person. I'm not that into politics, because the fact of the matter is today in our America, politics impacts people's daily lives. And their viability to exist, to thrive, to be able to live in a community and feel safe. So that's number one. Ultimately, we're gonna share some resources with you folks later on, and we're gonna talk about things that we can do to act. But the most important piece, all the action we wanna do is not beneficial if we don't take that moment to self-introspect, to self-interrogate, to educate ourselves about the issues that are going on. When I say that, you know, it's one thing we teach our kids the golden rule, to treat others the way we want to be treated. Or we tell ourselves, you know, it's important to put ourselves in others' shoes, right? And psychology backs up the importance of perspective taking and reflection. But what are the active processes we can take? And I know that this can be hard, and sometimes we actually don't know where to even begin with this. So I tried to break down some of the things I want us to reflect on as a thread during this conversation, and I'll come back to it at the end. Because if you take nothing else away, it's to begin the path on this journey to understand things like critical race theory. What does that even mean? We're gonna go over some vocab that will hopefully be useful to you in beginning the path of this journey. So with that self-interrogation, number one, our history, the context we find ourselves in. What are the symbols, the norms, the assumptions that we have by just being born into where we were, to find ourselves in this country, to find ourselves wherever we were born, and to grow up and to recognize what is the history that has shaped that narrative. To have an America that when our founding fathers came, started off with the role of Black people being enslavement, for them to have been ripped from their homes in Africa and brought here on ships where hundreds of them died along the way, and to just serve. For that to have been the beginning of our history, that is the context we find ourselves in. And it's not that, you know, a snap of a finger or one law was going to take away the legacies of that, right? So number one in self-awareness is a recognition of the history of our context. And when we say that, that's in our country, that's in our state, and that's in our county as well. And we'll share a little bit more to kind of shed light on how that is. So what policy, and that of course built policies that systemically and structurally became the law, and that propagated itself in racist ways. So that's how we reflect on history. And of course, a piece of that is also the propaganda that we had to use to convince ourselves that some of these policies were worth propagating further and passing on to our children and to the next generation. And that lives on. You know, when we're born into our context, we find ourselves just like today. I mean, let's take something like one of the policies, the anti-immigrant policies that are happening right now. So Trump's Muslim ban, right? We're gonna have people born into a generation where they did not witness this happening, and they were not aware of the critiques that were going on, or the claims, you know, that this is fear-mongering, that this is racist, and they're gonna believe that's the status quo, that that's just how things are. So in the same way that we can't imagine how our kids are gonna look at things that we think are absurd right now, our kids won't know that. They're just gonna be born to see that as normal. And that is what has been happening for years and years and years, from the beginning of slavery, when we had kids being born into families, seeing that as just normal. That's just how things are. I mean, Black people, this Black person just lives in my house and serves me food. It's just how things are. So number one is to question our history and to look at how that informs our context. Number two is to look at media and the influences of what's covered and what's not, and how often we're exposed to different things and how that influences our psyche. So let's think about how Black individuals are portrayed in the media. There are statistics actually that will show how more often than not, their mention will be negative, right? So if you're not someone who interacts with or is Black himself or interacts with Black people on a daily basis, what is your experience or exposure to Black communities gonna be? Is it gonna be crime? Because every time a crime is committed, it's Black man found XYZ? Or with the Hispanic community, is it gonna be something about, you know, murderers and rapists? Or is it gonna be drug related? Because those are the stories that are being covered, and that is the way that they're covered. We have to pay attention to how the media forms our thinking, and our exposure to these stories shapes the way that we relate to some of these communities. And at the end of the day, those set up implicit biases, which I'll define a little bit later. So as we think, again, self-awareness. So number one, history. Number two, the media's influences on us and our exposure. Number three, our own families and our cultures and how those impact. And when I say culture, this is not just for people who have immigrant backgrounds in this country. It's for everyone. Every one of our families has a culture and has norms that have been put in place. What is acceptable to say and what is not. And these norms and this culture lead to a proximity to what's different. What is the way we relate to different things that we either encounter or not. And we probably can't relate to the things that are more distant than us. So they seem easier to develop stereotypes about. How do we choose to raise our own children in perpetuating some of these norms? So number one, history. Number two, media. Number three, our own families and culture. And finally, psychology. Human psychology, time and time again, in studies, even in labs, shows us that humans prefer the status quo. People don't like change. It makes them uncomfortable. They like what's familiar. And so then this effort to bring about this change becomes that much more difficult, because you're not only trying to make a claim or a statement about civil rights and human rights, you're having to toy with people's resistance to that change, even if it's wrong. People also, study after study shows that people tend to exhibit what's called conformity. That as human beings, we fall into practices because we see everyone else around us doing it. That's the whole concept of peer pressure. And it doesn't go away as adults, that we feel influenced by the behaviors of those around us. And I'll say this too, when we saw this incident happening with George Floyd, people stayed quiet until it became what it became and exploded into what it did. And then you found everyone writing letters of condemnation and letters that supportive of Black Lives Matter. But let me tell you, a few years ago, people were a lot more careful to say Black Lives Matter than they are today because of conformity. It is human nature that when something becomes mainstream, it becomes cool and trendy, everyone hops on board. And so that makes the challenge towards change that much more difficult, because oftentimes doing the right thing to reverse history, right, touching back on the historical context, when we have wrongs from history that we have been raised and have just accepted to be reality, it takes an immense amount of effort to undo that. And when people conform, it's a minority who is right against the majority who is wrong. And that just tends not to sit well with many people, including our own elected officials and leadership. So, and of course, there's cowardice as well that human beings exhibit, not to show the courage necessary to take these stances. So, you know, I'll leave it at that, and I'll cover a little bit more of this at the end. But as we move forward in this conversation, let's think about taking away that main point of self-awareness. Let's begin interrogating history. Let's think about how the media influences us, how we shape our own thinking, the influence of family and culture on us, and human psychology and how it facilitates dynamics that make it very difficult for the right kind of change to happen. And of course, our being complicit in all of that furthers the ineptitude of the change. All right, so with that, we will actually begin to look at some of that history. We'll talk on a national level, state level, and then we'll go into Fairfax County right here and realities you may not even realize. So Lisa, please take it away.
All right, so the first thing before I start tracing our history back from when the first Africans got here, I want to say that why are we looking at history in the first place? Why does it even matter? A lot of us, like, there's this thing called American exceptionalism that students like me and you have learned in APUSH. We've learned, you know, from the way that our courses are taught that we have a lot of things to be proud of in American history. And that is true. Yet we can't just ignore the mistakes that we've made in the past and pretend that they didn't exist in order to improve or in order to view our current state in a positive and optimistic view. We have to recognize that, hey, we made mistakes in the past, and that is why we're here like this today. And by recognizing those mistakes, that's the only way that we can possibly move forward and improve on those mistakes. So the first time that Africans were brought to our country was actually in our own home state of Virginia, to Jamestown, Virginia. There were about 20 Africans who were brought here in 1619. Followed by 6 to 7 million enslaved people, brought against their will, just stripped away from their homes across the ocean. How insane is that? And, you know, that's something that we just were presented as a fact. And it's just like, okay, but actually take a moment to think about these huge, massive amounts of people being brought here against their will. And that is essentially one of the major foundations of all of our history. That is where so much of this has started. So following that, you know, for the sake of time, once we have established our country, think about this for a moment. Our country was founded upon finding freedom from the Britishers, right? We wanted to found our own country, yet we were enslaving people within the same region of land. That doesn't make any sense, right? So our Constitution, in fact, it recognized the institution of slavery and dictated that slaves were 3/5 of a person. That was what the law of the land preached. That was the law of the land that was above every single authoritative figure, every single citizen of the country. And it took so much time to change that, and it still, frankly, has not changed completely. The South and the North region, they divided because of economic reasons, and suddenly they had different priorities. These divisions grew, and that's what led to the eventual Civil War. We have things to celebrate too, things that we should view as role models, because even at that time, you know, abolitionist movements happened. We had the Nat Turner's Revolt, a successful armed slave rebellion, along with the Underground Railroad. So these aren't just, you know, terms in history. These are actual households, like the ones that you and I are living in right now, who supported these individuals who all they wanted was the right to live. They helped them, they brought them into their homes. Now, I'm obviously not saying that you need to do something to that extent, but it's important to recognize that there were people who took the initiative to do this in the past, and that's something that we should model after even now.
And let's pause right there for a sec, Lisa. Nat's Rebellion, right? So that was a slave rebellion. You had people up in arms demanding their freedom. At the time, that would have been viewed as a violent riot, as a barbaric thing by a group of thugs who don't know what they're doing and are causing chaos in the community, right? Why couldn't they just peacefully tell us that this is what they're going through? And we see similar threads of argument today, right? So I just wanted to flag that, but that was normal at the time, and no one would have questioned the appropriateness of what was at play, because it was what was accepted as a society and came to be understood over time. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure I flagged that we again, that self-awareness, challenging ourselves to think about our assumptions and why we think the way we think today. Go ahead, Lisa.
No, that was an incredible point, and that draws a really good connection to what's happening right now with the riots. So moving forwards, we have the Dred Scott case where the U.S. Supreme Court, the moral judge of the land, the entity that's supposed to tell us what is right and what is wrong. But that's not true. They don't tell us what is right or wrong. They tell us what is constitutional and what is unconstitutional. And at this time, it was constitutional for slavery to exist. We can't be putting the right thing and the constitutional thing together always at the same time, because if any one person can be wrong, any group of people can be wrong, even the law can be wrong. And it's our individual as citizens to be able to challenge that. Now, this case essentially ruled that all territories were open to slavery, excluding only when they became its own state entity. So we see that these tensions are rising, and eventually we are leading up to President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation that officially freed the slaves. So, it's easy for policy to happen, or it's not easy for policy to happen, but when policy happens, it's easy to say, okay, problem solved, we found the solution. But the truth is that nothing really happens until grassroots up, until socially up, we agree to those policies and we decide to make those changes household to household. So while the Emancipation Proclamation happened, it took so much time, and it's still taking time in order for that to officially occur to its fullest potential. So even after slavery was officially abolished after the Civil War, the South still found loopholes in legislation through a series of laws called the Black Codes. And basically what happened here is that an African American's ability to find jobs, to find education, to own land, all three of these things were restricted through these loopholes, through these Black Codes. And a pattern of that, can still be seen here, where pay rights, other problems are being replicated, where people find loopholes in policy and are able to justify them. And it's hard to fight back against something that our society just accepts. So following this in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson decided that the separate but equal was going to be a thing. They legalized segregation. And of course, we all know what resulted with that. The NAACP was found, which was a huge political protest movement demanding civil rights. And this is the time period when a lot of race riots occurred. So again, drawing that line between what happened in 1909 to here, to 2020. So many race riots occurred, and this was how that message was conveyed, where if lives can be taken away, sometimes these people had to resort to means of riots in order to truly get their message across. These people aren't in favor of violence. They're only doing this because that is the only way that they're able to convey their voices. That's the only way that their voices are going to be heard, is if they have to resort to means such as rioting.
And to that point, I want to also address, when we talk about self-awareness, I'm questioning, whether it's the media, the framing of different things. Riots as a term is used to undermine some of the efforts that are being put forth. So sometimes you'll have a protest. If you remember during, after Trayvon Martin's death or Michael Brown, right? There were these riots happening, but really they could be protests framed as riots to undermine what they're trying to do. And this again goes back to the point of, how do we see ourselves? How do we arrive at a level of self-awareness and understanding of our context, where we can see ourselves in these people who are protesting, given those conditions? That's when we can say that, and obviously we all know that a normal person doesn't just go out of their way and start burning things, right? But how do we get to that point is when we are able to empathize to such a degree that we can understand that a denial of freedom gives people no options. or an understanding that any one day, you know, your brother can walk outside and get shot, jogging like Ahmad, who we spoke, who we shared the story of, that leads to a level of discontent and distrust with public institutions and power, who ultimately take that power to serve and to protect, right? That would lead to that outcome. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that itself is a political term, and we should interrogate the sources of that. So go ahead, Lisa.
So I want to also take some time to sort of recognize everything that African Americans have contributed to our history, because they were a strong part of our history. They were a reason why we have also built ourselves up to who we are today. And in 1914, nearly 380,000 African Americans served during World War I. Now, this was just, these are people who were serving their country loyally when they were being mistreated by their country themselves. Just imagine that. Like, it's already hard enough to fight for your country, even being treated as a respected, loyal citizen. Now imagine if you're not even given the proper rights and you're still expected to serve your country. That is the extent of the nobility that the African Americans have shown us in our history. And other countries recognize that. France had recognized that and had awarded these African Americans a Medal of Honor when the United States itself was much more reluctant to do so. So following that, in 1920, the Harlem Renaissance was a migration of African Americans moving northward. And what's more special to see about this is that they were discovering freedom of expression through literature, through artistic means, music, dance. There were so many methods through which their talents were being shown to people across the country. And I think it's just extremely important to recognize that. So following that, in 1954, we had the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision where schools were desegregated. And that was a landmark decision, as I'm sure a lot of you know, that said—
We'll touch on that in more detail. So you can cover that for now, but we're gonna cover it.
So as it was a landmark decision. And following that, we have a series of movements with Martin Luther King Jr., but a lot of many other activists who were able to bring about this change. It's important to recognize that this was not one man. This was the efforts of so many citizens across the country, so many citizens who thought that they were just normal people like you and me. And so following that, we have the Million Man March, where hundreds of thousands of African Americans gathered in Washington, D.C., right here next door. And they were uniting in the face of the US war on drugs that was unproportionately affecting African Americans. So this was a political issue that was occurring at the time that African Americans rallied up against. So this clearly just shows us that African Americans are people who we need to respect as a part of our community, and marches like these need to happen even now. And finally, to present time, 2008, President Barack Obama was elected, which was marking a milestone in African American progress and in our progress as a country as a whole, because it truly shows that leadership is something that should be accessible to anyone, regardless of background. And finally, 2013, with the founding of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is exactly what we are seeing today. Now, it was founded as a response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer, George Zimmerman. And it's just really important to recognize, like, that was 2013, we're in 2020 now. And it shouldn't be happening that every time one person's tragic story is being broadcasted over media, that it is then when people are finally able to say that Black lives matter. Black lives always matter. All lives should matter, but we need to recognize that because of our uncertain circumstances, Black lives need to matter. And it is finally that we're here, present day, that I just want to make extremely clear, based on evaluating the history of all the years that has led up to us now, that if any one person can be wrong, any group of people can be wrong, our law can be wrong. And it is our duty to sort of challenge that, to analyze what's been happening so far, and to not just flow with the conformity, but to actually be able to make change.
Thank you, Lisa, for going over the timeline. And certainly I want to make sure I bring in Sujatha Hampton, who is the education chair for the Fairfax County NAACP, who has long led the effort actually from the 50s to build us, or to push Fairfax towards a more equitable place. So Sujatha, one of the things that we heard in the timeline was election of a Black president, 2008, everyone think, oh, racism is fixed, we're colorblind, it's all over, it's great. Tell us why that's not the case. So, sometimes when we look at the timeline, we think we've made so much progress. Years later, we find ourselves where we are. How can people understand the discrepancies with that?
Well, if you think about it, it's not that unusual. Of course, it's unusual to have elected a Black president, that singular event, but it isn't Black exceptionalism has always been something that you can find that, you have all of a sudden this Black person that's supposed to be the be all end all of whatever, like Tiger Woods or say Venus Williams or Michael Jackson or whatever that we have.
Oprah, yeah.
Oprah. And then you could say, oh, well, gosh, Oprah, she's a billionaire and she's got her own production company and she's this. So we're post-racial, The problem, of course, being, and as all people of color know, like everybody on this chat knows that I can see up here anyway, you can't become post-racial if you've never accepted the actual reality of your history, right? That's it. If you've never accepted it, then how do you ever get past it? How do you become post-racial? Right? That's like having a relationship with somebody and you've never acknowledged that you have this problem with this relationship, and all of a sudden you say, we fixed our problems. No, you haven't fixed your problems. Obviously you haven't, because you never dealt with your problems. So having elected Barack Obama means nothing. And in fact, on some level, you could say the country was able to say, we are no longer racist because we've had a Black president. And while we had that Black president, nothing really changed in terms of any of our structures, right? Nothing changed in terms of any of our structures. So you can say whatever you want. You hear people say that all the time. We elected a Black president. All we have to do, and you guys are so young, I'm looking at you like, you're so young. You guys have to just continue to have the courage to say, well, that's not true. That's not true, because you're going to constantly be hearing from everybody in your lives all this gaslighting, and they're expecting, because you're young, that you're just gonna, that you're just going to be okay with whatever it is that anybody says about whatever you're going to accept their truth, right? And that's just not always the case. You have to always be fighting for truth. And if you think about it, the young lady in yellow, whose name I missed because I got on here late. Lisa. As Lisa was going over this history and talking about these different things, at various points in our history, lots of things have been legal, right? So it's a question of what's legal and what's moral. That's a really important distinction. And there was a time when lots of things that are no longer okay now were completely okay. There used to be a time when the both sidesism in the newspaper was about the pros and cons of slavery, right? That there were pros of slavery. There were serious pros of slavery. That was an argument that legitimate newspapers like the New York Times would have, right?
Right, and that was debated in on the floor of Congress.
Right, whether or not women should vote, that was debated. Whether or not African Americans should vote, that was debated. Whether or not we had the right to claim native lands, that was debated. As though there was a debate, as though there were actually two sides to that argument. There were never two sides to that argument if you were going to examine it from a moral standpoint. But morality also changes. You look back at our holy books and you say what was moral versus what's moral now. So these things are ever changing, right? We have to have some sort of metric or some sort of compass, a true north that we can say for ourselves, for humanity, for all time, that we could judge something on some metric that would stand the test of time. I feel like we are in a position now to think about those metrics with much broader vision, because you in this chat, people who are interested in tuning into this on other, on Facebook or whatever, that the people who are choosing to engage in this conversation are interested in divining what are those steady true north metrics that we could use that would allow us to determine what is and is not worth fighting for, what is and is not a true north, what is and is not debatable. Some things aren't debatable, and people will choose to tell you that they are. For example, changing our Robert E. Lee High School, the name of Robert E. Lee High School. You would think, for probably everybody who's on this chat and most of the people who are listening, that that's not really something we should be debating in 2020. It's a ridiculous conversation to be arguing over the name of a high school that was, during the era of massive resistance, that they would have named it as a big, forget you to the whole community, to say we're just going to name this we're going to name it Robert E. Lee because we don't care about your forced integration, and so we're going to do this to you. And that so many years later we would still be having that debate when that was it's not like they named it that to honor him. They didn't. They named it that to make everybody say we are not succumbing to this willingly. We're doing it in protest.
Thank you,
We all know that.
Sujatha.
So why are we still arguing? So really, when you think about the history and all the things that you said, Dred Scott, imagine that was actually something that people debated on and the poor man lost, right? So it's just like, it doesn't even make any sense. There's no arguing. So in 2020, we should be using different and better metrics.
Yeah.
True, we have much more access to history. The history is, the information is readily known. It's easily known. We don't have to say, like, okay, so you all are so young on this chat. Like me, I remember when I was in high school, if your teacher assigned you a paper, it wasn't due for a month because you had to get your parents to drive you to the library and you had to check out a bunch of books and you had to read all of those books and take notes on those books and then make a paper. My daughter, my son, they're regularly assigned papers, 20-page papers that are due in 3 days, right? It's not that big a deal for you guys to get the information you need. It's right there. You can digest it easily. Somebody has put it together in a thread on Twitter that you can, with all the links, and you can find everything. It's not just Wikipedia, true links to real academic papers. The information to inform us, to help us make moral decisions is readily known in a way that it wasn't. So we don't have to succumb to somebody else's idea of both sidesism. We can actually look and, what is required of us as intelligent consumers of information and people who are trying to make change, right? Real change agents, like you on the board, Abrar. What is important for us is you have to do analysis. You get the information and you have to engage in the analysis. And in the analysis is the truth. The analysis will provide you the truth. Because a lot of the people who say, I'm not a racist, okay, if you're not a racist, then that means given the right information and the logical analysis, you, because you are not a racist, as you've just told me, can come to similar conclusions that are moral.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And that's where the application piece comes in and
Right.
where we begin to understand this within our context right here, right now. It's not
Mhm.
something just for the 60s or the 70s.
Mhm.
It's happening today and will continue to happen. And it's also not something just for the racists, right? It's not just a problem for those people that are in a box. We all have to self-interrogate how we're influenced by the systemic structures that exist and how they influence our own thought, right? So
Yes.
even something as, the classic example, and you're walking down a street late at night and you see a black man, do you choose to cross the street and walk the other way?
Mhm.
Or if you're on the metro and you're holding your purse and a black guy sits next to you, do you hold it a little bit tighter or do you put it to the other side? I mean, these are the implicit ways that these biases and the legacy of the structures that you guys are outlining on us today, right? So we can't assume that we're immune of these things. And you mentioned the two-sidedism, right? That we think that there's a balanced argument when really oftentimes there isn't.
Right.
I would love for you to touch on, so trying to bring people along, right? So some people maybe who are watching are beginners, really getting a grasp of this. We heard, of course, Black Lives Matter, that came out. Many people jumped on board. Then we started seeing Blue Lives Matter, and we also started seeing All Lives Matter.
Mhm.
And on the face of it, of course, why wouldn't we say all lives matter? Don't we all agree? Of course we agree with that.
Mhm.
Help our audience understand what are the problems with that, and why is that something that, you know, undermines the Black Lives Matter piece of the whole thing?
Well, Black Lives Matter was never meant to say that all lives didn't matter, right? So that's the fundamental thing that people who are struggling with that need to remember. Black Lives Matter was never there to say a Black life matters more than any other life. It was there to say a Black life matters too. A Black life matters as much as any other life, because the way that it breaks down, you would think that the Black life doesn't matter. If you can kneel on somebody's neck for 9 minutes, and that Black person's life doesn't matter, clearly, right? If you can throw a child from school into alternative care or expel him, then that life and his education doesn't matter. So all the Black Lives Matter movement ever meant was to stand up and say, you have to see us. You have to see, I say us, and I want to make it clear, I am not Black. So it's really like when I do this, I'm giving I'm sort of arguing on, but I'm standing up for.
And there's an intersectionality there that.
Of course there is, absolutely there is. But I just want to make that clear. I don't want to be claiming space that isn't mine. So when I say we matter, I'm not talking about myself. I'm not Black, but I am talking about myself in that sense. If you think I'm Black and you're going to treat me like I'm Black, then I need to be in that space too, to say that that's what it means, right? So anybody offended by that or says, what are you talking about? All lives matter. Nobody in the Black Lives movement says that that isn't true. Of course, you won't find a person in the Black Lives Matter movement who says, of course, all lives matter. Also, that's the reason we're telling you our lives matter too, right? So that's really what that is. Now, here's the thing about the Blue Lives Matter. Because Blue Lives Matter is not
I'm
the
hearing
same.
some anticipation of something.
I mean, Blue Lives Matter saying that is not the same as saying all lives matter. People who are saying all lives matter, I think that they are not nearly, they're not having nearly as belligerent a point of view, let's say. Okay. But when you're saying Blue Lives Matter, it is an affront. You're saying that Black Lives Matter. I'm letting you know cops' lives matter. Of course, cops' lives matter. Cops are humans and their lives matter too. There are Black cops. There's intersectionality there too. Black lives matter. Human lives matter. Black cops' lives matter. Cops' lives matter. Everybody's life matters, right? But when you say Blue Lives Matter, what you are saying is, I stand up for cops over the people. That's really what you're saying, right? They put their lives on the line every day to protect us. But if they're not putting their lives on the line to protect us, then what do we say about that, right? So here's the thing to think about. The system is corrupt, right? That's my view. I will say the police system is corrupt. We have ample evidence of that. Now that we have video recording devices in our pockets, everybody can see that, right? Because Black people have to prove their story. So on top of then the fear and the terrorism of having been assaulted by the police or thrown up against a car or intimidated or abused, you would typically, before we had these, you would typically have to go home and then say something. You go to the police station. Why would they believe you? You're just somebody, and you're somebody that they've said your life doesn't matter as much, right? So why would anybody listen to you? Because this is clearly the story since the beginning of time. So if this is the story since the beginning of the time, there's no reason to think that anything would change, except for the proof. So Blue Lives Matter is a very different thing. Blue Lives Matter is standing up as an affront. Again, they're affronted by the concept of people saying Black Lives Matter, right? But we can see, and what we're seeing now, the whole country is burning because having been given this much evidence, what are we talking about? We pay your salary. You are public servants. You work for us. Right? So if you work for us and this is a public service and you are behaving in this way that is against the law, what are we talking about?
Yeah, and that's where I want to emphasize what you mentioned about the distinction between the legal and the moral, because the legacy of the, I mean, starting from slavery, as Lisa outlined, all the way down, has led us to have laws that are now discriminatory, right? Because people who had discriminatory sensibilities or existed in a time that was more tolerant of some certain perspectives led us to a place where we have certain laws, and those laws are in place. And so even for that person that you mentioned, who's going to now, who was mistreated by the police, let's say, and is going to go sue or is going to go try to, which by the way is very costly, requires a certain level of education and awareness of what's going on, but which is already a barrier to entry. But assuming that we're there, to say that, it's a just society, so just take it to court. The laws themselves could lead to a circumstance where someone was entirely immorally treated, but will lose a lawsuit. And trying to justify that, right?
Well, they will. It's not. I mean, it's not an option. Right. It's not a question. Of course they will, right? Because all of the laws are written.
The expectation,
that way, right? So, and juries. So we all know, how hard. If you can't serve on a jury because you have a past felony conviction, right? Then, and so many disproportionately African American people have felony convictions, right? How does an African American person get a trial? How does that person get the trial with his peers?
Right. It's supposed to be a jury of your peers in the Constitution.
How do you get a jury?
Right?
I'm sorry. Yeah. How do you get a jury of your peers if you have this disproportionality in the number of people who are carrying that conviction, that felony conviction in their past? It's not possible. It's not possible, and you end up with this like Atticus Finch situation in 2020. It's untenable. This situation is untenable. And the reason we're seeing this happening right now is because we have this COVID pandemic. People have lost their jobs, their livelihoods, their health. They're trapped at home. All of these things coming to a head at once, because why wasn't Eric Garner enough? It's the same thing that happened to Eric Garner. It wasn't enough. So,
Yeah, no, thank you, Sujata. Yeah, and in particular, I wanted to also bring us a little bit to the education piece in outlining some of that history. Feel free to chime in as well. I know you do a lot of the work for FCPS specifically on behalf of the NAACP. But when Lisa was outlining, we had in 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson, right? So we had the Supreme Court case that decided schools that are separate are equal, right? So separate but equal became a thing, and it became okay that we have Black people who live in these neighborhoods and white people who live in these neighborhoods, and they have their own schools, and that's totally fine. But so that actually didn't just lead to that, it sanctioned laws, right? So you have the Supreme Court ruling, and then you have all the laws that happened between 1896 and 1954. So, about more than 50 years, right? You had laws being created under that banner. So then you have separation on buses and schools and other public facilities. And that's where we see these egregious pictures when we learn in K through 12, whites only on a water fountain or something like that, right? Then we had in 1954, Brown versus Board, which was essentially challenged that. And we ended up with an outcome where the Supreme Court ruled unanimously, separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. So that's when states were then given the task of having to integrate their schools after many, many years of separate facilities, separate neighborhoods, even zoning and housing laws. What we hear now is modern day redlining and all that, right? But that led to communities kind of being ghettoed, right? Where certain words come and separated in those ways. And so can you imagine? So I'm not talking, by the way, just US history. I'm not talking about, the deep cities of the South that we may think are those racist areas. I'm talking about Fairfax County.
Yes.
So, with that, in Fairfax County, we used to have Black schools and we used to have white schools. Yes. And Luther Jackson, where the school board meets right now, was the first Black school that was instituted in our county. And then, in 1954, we have records of the NAACP writing a letter to the school board, who, by the way, caved despite the NAACP's request to have a committee to review desegregation, that they decided to change the name because it was just, it was too touchy, too controversial. We heard too much public outcry. So when we think of these parallels today, similar to, Lee High School or some of these decisions that are happening with the naming, I wanted to also, there was a Post reporter who at the time of all of this said organizational leaders were more extreme in their opposition to school desegregation than the people of the state were. So here in Fairfax County, we had a weird dynamic where right after Brown versus Board, Virginia's government in 1956 passes a law that's massive resistance, essentially, right? So this is what Sujatha was referring to earlier with the Lee High School name. So it wasn't just, you know, people who were, I don't know, trying to remember our Confederate leaders. You ended up having, despite the federal government, our Supreme Court's decision to integrate schools, our state was saying no. And we just passed a law that's gonna make sure that our counties and all of our local jurisdictions don't follow that.
Right.
And so once you had that period of massive resistance, that it's massive resistance, meaning massive resistance to desegregation, which is integration, right? That's where you hear, you know, there was some news around talks about busing and things like that during the presidential debates and all that, right? What was that about? That was about this period of time, right? So let's take the context of the people in the 50s who were seeing localities busing Black kids to white neighborhoods, right? Let's just take that, where they're now having to contend with, my kid goes to an all-white school, and all of a sudden, we're gonna now have these Black kids from that neighborhood that is kind of scary, I don't know anything about, that are gonna start coming to my kid's school. The people in that context, of course, we're gonna, you know, express outcry, we're gonna say that this is not okay, whatever. But this is where historical context becomes so important, right? Because we don't realize that years before that, there was a decision made to cause that there were laws in place to say that Black people and white people can't be in school together. It wasn't that naturally happened. And so that was to right a wrong of the past, but still, because the people in that context aren't aware of it or whatever, there's this kind of irrational public outcry about it. We see the same thing now. We just had this election, right? That you know, new school board gets elected, whatever. What was the top issue during that election? It was having kids from certain neighborhoods go to school with my kid in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that's where actually the narrative, the argumentation of neighborhood schools, that came out of this time when there was integration, when Black kids were coming and when we, you know, there was this decision on the country level to allow for that mixing in schools. And folks were saying, no, we want our neighborhood schools. It was a ploy, it was a word used to essentially say, we don't want Black kids in our schools. Yeah. And people don't realize today that when that is used, it's on the legacy of that kind of trend. And they think, you know, it just means that, you know, we want whatever schools that are in our neighborhood. So we have to be very mindful. And again, the self-awareness piece, when we understand the historical context for these things, then we can very clearly stand in opposition to that, right? Because it's loaded.
We can stand in opposition to that, for sure. We can always stand in opposition to that because we have sort of the moral high ground
clarity,
to stand in opposition of that, right? But people, the way that racism has created an economic differential, it gives people, without realizing it, they are arguing a racist point of view without having to acknowledge that it's a racist point of view because they make it an economic question, right? Because we do bus in Great Falls here. Like my daughter drives an hour to go to school from Great Falls to Langley High School. When Herndon is across the street. Why? Because it was cut out, specially designated for that to be the case. It doesn't make any sense. It's completely illogical for our neighborhood to have changed. It used to be Herndon High School, which is across the street. And some 30 years ago or something, there was some special dispensation, I guess. I don't know why or what happened, was maybe new houses were built or something, and they changed that so that it would be, we would be designated to another school. And that's busing. Actually, we are busing, but we just aren't calling it that because it's, you know, it's in our economic interest, I guess, to be able to say that we go to this school.
Right,
So,
and that's in the reverse direction, right? So this is not busing for integration. This is busing for segregation.
Exactly, this is busing for segregation. So the thing is that people are perfectly happy to do that when it's in their economic interest. They're perfectly happy to do these things that they say are so repugnant, right? So, you know, it's very important that we keep what we're arguing for in the forefront of our mind. This is what we're talking about, because if we were really talking about a neighborhood school, I mean, I literally live across the street from Herndon High School, you know,
Right.
7 minutes away. And I rarely go down into Great Falls because it's too far. It's just too far. It doesn't even make any sense. So it gets tied up. It gets a little, a little muddled because it's economic and because it's been so many generations now of this economic malfeasance. Right.
And that was a result of many of these policies, right? So, I mean, we had a program, the federal government, I'm not even gonna say we, had a program where this whole war on drugs thing, what was the point of it?
Yeah.
We have facts now. I mean, we're not talking, conspiracies or just claims made by people of color.
Yeah.
We're talking about facts that came out of the administration that show us that there was a program paid for by taxpayer dollars intended to introduce drugs into the Black community, right? Because on a sociological level, I mean, we know that means they're undermined. They have years to kind of, I mean, once you have someone addicted to drugs, that's a financial issue. That's, obviously they're no longer as productive a member of their own family and all of that, right? So you get them addicted and then that's exposure to more people, et cetera. Or, government sanctioned injections of syphilis in people where the government literally put disease in people and tested on them. I mean, these are things that are very hard to believe, but when you have policies like that over many, many years and generations, and then of course with the segregation of neighborhoods, and then financial decisions all the way from the top, but also on localities to give more funding to certain areas or to build the best facilities in certain areas and not others, because who was representing, who was making those decisions didn't always reflect the community. All these gaps that just built over time, years and years, it's no surprise that we find ourselves with some of the correlations that exist, with socioeconomics and race, even in our own county.
Yes.
And the legacy of, massive resistance, you touched on the boundaries piece. There's also the names piece, right? So with massive resistance, these names, Woodson High School, for example, was named after the superintendent who made many of these decisions and led the efforts in massive resistance. So, and again, when we know initially, right, it's an emotional thing for people because you say, I don't want the name of my school to change. This was I'm an alum and that's what meant so sentimental value, attached to it. Understood and heard, really. But when we look at the context and see how this came to be, it becomes something that is unquestionable, and that argument is imbalanced, right? Because my sentimental attachment to the name of my high school, it doesn't even compare to the statement that is made when it is a policy on a state or county level to name a school something to deliberately be offensive to a community,
It's putting your sentimentality at the same level as the traumatizing and the terrorism, honestly, of other people. And when you say it, if ever someone uses, like, say, Adolf Hitler, Goebbels, if you use those names, right? Either people will understand, like, it's terrorism. It is terrorism to have Adolf Hitler High School. It's like a terroristic thing. People shouldn't have to go to Adolf Hitler High School, right? Or if you don't want to go all the way up to Adolf Hitler, right? You could do, although, Robert E. Lee, truly the head of the Confederate Army, so it's like similar, right? But if you, any number of these other, say, Nazis, and you name something after them, it becomes much more clear, right? But people get then defensive and are unwilling to do that hard work because racism is so painful to deal with. And because we just refuse as a society to fully own that and do that hard work of, like I said, that information is readily known, right there at our fingertips. If you were to go in and deeply go into that, it's humiliating. I know this for, like, so many of my white friends who are going through this process now, the shame, it's embarrassing, it's shameful, they feel defensive, they feel terrible about all the misinformation that they have spouted, that they have put forward, that they have shared, That's sometimes what it takes, because if we were all on the same page, just think about it. Just say like the whole scourge of slavery happens. Let's just go there. Whole scourge of slavery happens. The Civil War is over. The enslaved people are emancipated. And right there at that beginning, way back, right, in the very, very beginning, if everybody had been on board, if the whole country had been on board and said, well, you know what? We made a big mistake. That was a terrible, terrible thing that we did. With slavery was bad, the Civil War is bad, all this death is bad. Let us together unify to make everybody who's here in whatever state they come to us at, whatever state of ignorance, whatever state of physical, mental, emotional incapacitation via the enslaved state, poverty, like, white poverty, all of that, socioeconomic and racial divide. Like, let's just start right now and let's do a good job. Let's educate everybody. Let's do our best work. Imagine where we would be now if we had done that hard work in the 1860s. Imagine where we would be now, right? But nobody wanted to do it. If we had done it now, then there's no problem the United States couldn't have solved. There's nothing we couldn't have done. There would be no problem that would be insurmountable for a country that rose to that stratosphere on stolen land and stolen labor, right? And then you just put it aside and you make your amends with your people and your God, and you just move forward and you do this thing. What could have the United States accomplished? Because it accomplished a lot of stuff with that baggage, but always hampered, always pulled back because of these devilish scourges in our backstory. And at no point does the country as a whole feel like coming together and telling itself the truth. That's all it would take. That's all it would take. Let's just look at that analysis that has been done for you and face your most humiliating feelings about this. And let's just move on forward. Because of course, not all white people, not all Black people, not all any kind of people are good or bad, right? We're all humans. But if we were all on the same page about facts, truth, and analysis, on the real analysis of our history, and we had a sort of moral lodestone, like we were just going in the same direction that said, we want everyone to live with their maximal potential, their own maximal potential. And that's what we're going to strive toward, that everybody should read well, everybody should do math well. But beyond that, we're not going to just do these ticky-tack things down here like basic cipher and basic reading. We're going to have big ideas, and we're going to teach children to have big ideas and to share with one another and to be good, all the great things that we think. Imagine if we were all on board with this thing, but we're not. You look at our school system, we are clearly not all on the same page.
Right. Yeah, and I want us to kind of face this reality, and we certainly have kind of productive steps forward to share with folks as well, as to what can be done. And I want to definitely make sure we get to those. You reminded me, Sujatha, one of the things I did want to make sure we outline for folks is sometimes you have this question, that why do we always have to talk about race? Or like, why does this always have to come up? Or can we just be talking about, X issue right now? Like, can we not bring that into it? And you may have heard of, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Maslow's this popular psychologist. He comes up with an analysis of what drives people and motivates their attention and their focus on certain issues. Mm-hmm. And he starts off, we have physiological needs, all of us, air, water, food, shelter, to just survive, right? The next level is actually safety needs, right? So before anyone is actually properly able to pay attention to philosophical issues or have conversations on a policy level, right? Or think bigger than themselves, their safety needs come first. And if people of color, minorities don't feel safe in a community, certainly that's going to be something that is at the top of the conversation. And we talked about trying to introduce some key terms. So that's where some of these conversations about privilege arise, right? So we have some people in our community where, physiological needs are met. Some people who they aren't, by the way, and we have to be mindful of that. But let's say, all right, now we're safety needs. We have a breakdown. There are people where that's met, and there are people who aren't. For those who it is, they can begin to think of love and belonging. They can think of esteem. So they focus on themselves and their self-actualization, which is ultimately the top rank of what human beings become occupied with, right? But there are people who can't get past that safety piece.
Of course not.
Right? Because they don't feel a belonging. So how are they supposed to engage on a societal level and feel that sense of belonging that allows them to arrive at self-actualization and fulfillment of their potential when that's a hindrance. So that's something I want to make sure I put out there, that there's a required, again, self-awareness. When that's where the peace privilege comes in. It's like, where on those ranks are you, or on those rungs? And what is the card that you've been dealt? Many of us were just lucky enough to be born into a circumstance where the majority looked like us and power looked like us, and that's what it was. And that's what the term privilege tries to capture. Oftentimes it's alienating. People feel that it's used against them and they don't really understand what it is or how it's useful. But these are the ways we can begin to think about it. So it's not, an offense on a person if they have privilege. It's not a bad thing that you have privilege. It's simply, going back to our thesis for today, self-awareness and understanding of your positionality and how others are positioned as well, and how we relate with one another to make sure we all work towards just outcomes for everybody. So I wanted to make sure I put that there. The other piece is, I did want to move on to our next segment about why small things matter. So sometimes it's like, all right, I get it, certain things are racist, whatever, but it's just a joke. Like, I'm not, it's just a racist joke. Everyone makes racist jokes. Or terms, right? Recently, I'm gonna just say it, I believe it was Chantilly High School that had a senior picture that, was all over Twitter amongst alumni, where kids thought it was funny to just wear the N-word and make a word out of it with the letters, right? Why does that matter? Isn't it just high school kids having fun? So these things have an impact. Of course, it's offensive. That's layer number one. That on a basic level of humanity, we should have the dignity, or we should want to afford each other the dignity to exist without that kind of thing. But even on a societal level, there are a lot of psychological studies that look at genocide. How can a society get from being just normal people all the way to such a level of hatred and dehumanization to arrive at genocide? We look at the Holocaust, we can't imagine how that came to be, or any of the genocides that have occurred in human history. But it actually starts, believe it or not, your racist joke or your usage of some of these terms is contributing to our trajectory as a community, as a society, to outcomes like that. So there's actually, sociologists came up with the pyramid of white supremacy, and it's a tool to help us understand. Actually, in the meantime, Kim, if you don't mind, just pulling up an image and screen sharing as I go through this here. But this pyramid, we start with the indifference, that we go from a point where, we hear these things, they become normal. There are two sides to every story. Back to, the two-sidedness or two-sidedism that Sujatha was touching.
Yeah.
Both sidedism, right? Politics don't affect me. Avoiding confrontation when you hear it from your family. It's just, you just have to kind of deal with it. You become indifferent. You move forward to minimization. It's not that big of a deal, right? Like, we're just joking. Then it's veiled racism, where there's victim blaming sometimes, right? So in these encounters, when you hear a story from someone and they talk about an injustice that occurred to them, you think, nah, you're just being unreasonable, right? Like, we underplay those encounters. Then there's just discrimination. We're already at that point within our laws too. Then you have calls for violence. And that's where we have this transition between what we think is just normal to KKK and real, like, lynching and all of the stuff that we saw in the 60s and 70s, but that also persists with these murders that are happening. And believe it or not, that's just one step away from straight up genocide, violence and then genocide. And it's because of the level of dehumanization on a psychological level. We're just talking about human nature, not even a particular group here, but to build, starting from apathy, a lack of interest, a lack of investment in the issue. There you go. Thank you, Kimberly. And to build towards levels of normalcy, where it becomes a part of our policy, where it becomes accepted. We could easily take ourselves to a place that we never would have imagined how we had arrived at. And we look to societies before us and think that that's unimaginable. We would never be there. But what's our role in preventing that, right? Yeah. So, Sujatha, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that at all, but I wanted to.
Well, I think that the way that something that's been really playing in my mind in these recent days, as we're seeing so much violence erupt, something that's really making itself very clear is that if we were educated better, if we were educated more correctly with real information, these things couldn't happen. They happen because those police officers, bystanders, people who use casual racism have not been taught properly. So really we say these things start at home, like, your family is like this, and maybe that's true too, but then that too goes back to those people's education, your family's education, right? So really that's why what we do in school is so important. The time we would take to learn the truth at the time that is set aside from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. every day from the time you are 5 years old until you're 18 years old, we get you in school. If we took that time to actually teach children not about the feelings, we should teach each other this in such a way, practice kindness. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actual history. If we took the time to teach real history as opposed to fake history, then we wouldn't end up with things like that happening with George Floyd. It couldn't happen. Amy Cooper, the dog strangling Central Park racist, right? She's apparently like a New York liberal, right? And she's a very, very highly employed person. She's probably extremely well-educated person. I don't remember, actually, I think I did read about what her education was, but she's an extremely well-educated person. And she hasn't learned these very simple truths about history that would make her unafraid of this man with his sister bird watching in the park. There's no reason for her to be afraid, because she would not feel that way. She wouldn't feel that way if she were properly educated in the actual history. But we don't take the time to do that. We don't. And we do things like, Black History Month and other silly things. Again, I don't want to say Black History Month is silly. It's not that it's silly, it's what we do with it.
Nominal thing.
Nominal, like I have a child who just graduated from high school and one who's just graduated from college. And so I have many years of Black history projects under my belt, a lot of Black history projects that I've seen. They're just, absurd. Make a Black person out of a water bottle. So my son.
Your Black friend.
Like my son had a Carl Lewis water bottle. My daughter was actually, I tell the story all the time, she was actually assigned for the Black History Wax Museum. She was assigned, they were supposed to do civil rights heroes. And she was assigned Emmett Till. She was she was in 4th grade, so she was 9 years old. Emmett Till, A, not a civil rights hero, just a 14-year-old boy. B, you're supposed to dress up like this person. And he was, of course, lynched and drowned, left to, in that state, right? And left in an open casket by his mother, who said she wanted everyone to see what they did to her boy. The reason she was assigned Emmett Till for Black History Wax Museum is because her teacher, whom I liked and I knew for many years, she had been my son's teacher, just got a list of civil rights heroes, didn't learn the list herself, didn't go herself and do due diligence as a teacher and learn something about all of these people. It must have been a list of 20 people and she just assumed they were all civil rights heroes and moved on, And that's a problem. We don't teach this in school. We just don't teach it. And so nobody knows it. And so we end up with all kinds of misunderstandings and fear. And then you're willing to act on that because you just never learned the truth.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you, Sujatha. And I wanted to also have, Kimberly comment on her experience being a student in Lee High School. Obviously goes without saying, Kimberly is a young Black woman, and the legacy is what we've been talking about. So, and certainly, I know there's some challenges in South County as well. So maybe we can hear from Kimberly and Nathan on that before we move to our next segment.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, I went to South County my 8th grade year and 9th grade year, which is why me and Nathan actually have some history. And then I lived in the Lee Pyramid from as long as that I was, oh, it looks like it just stopped screen sharing. All right, cool. So as long as I've been in Fairfax County, I was in the Lee Pyramid. So I ended up going to South County for 2 years. And I think anybody who knows me and knows me at South County know that me and my sister didn't have a good time there, which is why we left and we moved back to Lee. So being at Lee, I think that a lot of I'm gonna just say Abrar because I think I always talk to Abrar about like certain platforms. I always have a bone to pick about people with professionalism and that just like the fact that a lot of times they don't seem real enough. They don't seem as if they have emotions. And I'm here to tell people we all have emotions and it's important to show them. I had my issues growing up. My brother would come from school, even being in the Lee Pyramid, one of the most diverse pyramids in the county. The Lee Pyramid, he would come home and he'd be like, oh, these teachers just don't like me. And I'm like, I mean, that's my big brother. I love him and he's one of the best people I know. Best people I know. And he'd be like, these teachers don't like me. And I'm like, what do you mean they don't like you? That don't even make sense. And I never understood it because what was I like 6? I was like 5. And I never understood it. And I think it took me until going to South County Middle School my 8th grade year until I understood it, until I realized. I had issues with administration with my sister. And even though when I moved to the high school, it got a little better, there were things that I felt as if it was difficult for me and my sister to just we didn't feel safe. And I felt that was really disappointing that I had to be in a school where I didn't feel safe. And I think a lot of my friends are like, I've been here my whole life. I lived here my whole life. I never felt like unsafe or unwelcome. Like, well, I moved from a place where everybody had different skin tones and I came to a different school and I felt different. I felt like I stood out. We felt targeted. Me, I'm lucky. I'm petite. I'm small. People look at me, my voice, even though like you may not see it from the lighting, I'm dark skinned. That's the first thing when I ran for this position, when I got the position, the first thing they saw for me, my platform was equity. My platform was implicit bias. But you see, for some reason, I didn't tell people that. I never told people that. But they looked at me and they like, I know what she gonna talk about. That's the first thing they see. When I walk outside, they don't know my name. They don't know my brother's name. They don't know my dad's name, my sister's name. They know what I look like though. And when I moved to Lee, I felt safer. People always talk about Lee. People talk about Hayfield. I think Kelly can speak to that too. I have Edison friends. I went to Twain. Those are some of the most diverse schools in this county. And you know how people talk about them? Ghetto. Talk about it. We're poor. We got gangs. We got drugs. That's the part of the problem. Why we got drugs? Because majority of our students are minorities. Because we're lower income. People need to have these conversations. Why is it that a school with 80% of the students being minorities named after a Confederate general? It doesn't make sense. And I'm gonna be so real because when I first started this position, I was kind of scared to kind of be a little more loud about it. I wanted to be like, people would tell me like, Kim, you gotta have a certain type of like see both sides. You see, like she said, see both sidisms. But at this point, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It's part of the problem that I have to kind of be like, oh yeah, I have to pretend to see both sides when honestly, I spent my whole life trying to understand both sides and I've never been able to because it's not there. It's not there and it's painful. It's hard. And it's hard having to argue with other people who just don't understand. So, I mean, I can speak a little bit. I have like, there's going to be like, for me, I ask everyone to bear with us. We're going to have some resources of what you're going to be able to do. I have a list of kind of like do's and don'ts of like advocacy. Like Mia and Nathan can speak to that because there's certain things that I feel as if a lot of my non-Black supporters have been trying to like do, but sometimes everyone means well, but sometimes some things are better than others and some things we should sort of avoid. So I ask that you bear with me. I can speak a little bit more to that. But yeah, I think also if Nathan wants to hop in about some of his experience, because I know he's been there longer than I have, and he's still at South County. So for me, I had the chance to kind of go, and I know he might not have wanted to go. He shouldn't have to. So I'm just gonna give it to him and see what, like, hear from him.
I want to start by saying it's so powerful, your story and how you tell it about being not having to spend your entire life trying to look for both sides and not seeing it. And the points you made about how people call Lee and Edison ghetto when there's drugs there, and that's of how these diverse schools, how they get framed in the minds of, I guess, the students in our county. And I think it's interesting because Abrar mentioned earlier how the media plays a big role in our implicit thinking about how, minor communities of color, what they do, what they act like, if you're not interacting with them on a daily basis. Because I'll tell you this, as a South County student, South County has drugs too. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's more than what you guys are experiencing at your schools, because I'll tell you, it's everywhere, it's every day, it's constant. So it's funny because that school, our school, it's not looked at, oh, it's not drug addled, it's a white school, it's very privileged. It's probably more. But I think we need to point that out. And I think the second side of that story, though, is how it's unfortunate, but I was lucky enough to go into my middle schooling at South County in the AAP program, and I didn't have that experience with my teachers. And I'm starting to realize now that with my brother, because my little brother's now 7th grade at South County Middle School, and he's having the same experiences that you talk about, Kim. And it's unfortunately becoming apparent, the tale of two cities, about the way that some teachers deal with kids, the way admin deals with kids at the middle school. So I acknowledge your stories, I hear them, and I hear them from my brother. But I have to say that looking back on what's been happening on Twitter these past few days about South County, it kind of hurts. Not me as a person or not my feelings or anything like that, but I genuinely have pride in my school, and it hurts to see videos like the one that circulated earlier with kids screaming the N-word in the bathroom or wherever they were. It's just not representative of the school as a whole. Although there are bad actors at our school, and they are more prevalent than they probably should be and are at other schools, it hurts because those voices end up washing out the good ones that do exist in South County. And that's just the nature of the severity of the issue. And that's probably a good thing because they need to be called out. But I'd like to point out that there are good actors at SoCo, and there are people who work to acknowledge these things, and teachers and admin who work, and they realize that there's this problem. And it's important that we point out the good work that they're doing on their end too.
Yeah, I just want to add, especially being from I went from Edison to Hayfield, and I remember being at Edison, and Hayfield, Edison's full of minorities, but when we saw Hayfield, before going there, it's like, oh, that's the black school. That's what we thought of it was, because there's a lot of black kids. But then I got there, it's split straight down the middle. Honestly, there's a lot of white kids and there's a lot of black kids. There's both, And I was like, I thought it was kind of funny because when I asked my parents, I was like, I want to go to Hayfield I wanted to go for the AAP. I mean, not for the AP program instead of IB, right? That is the IB. My parents were like, oh, there's a lot of black kids there. And I'm Hispanic, right? Anti-blackness is very, very prevalent in the Latinx community. And just one thing, I always do is I challenge my parents. I'm like, hey, these attitudes, and I know they don't mean bad. I know they don't mean bad. I think my mom's watching me right now. Actually, she's gonna, but it's the truth. And and I got to Hayfield, and I'm like, wow, it's split down straight down the middle. There's actually, and I've seen honestly a lot of white kids compared to what I used to see before I went to the school. And I'm thinking, okay, why is that? And then I see also my friends, a lot of them that are black or are minorities in general, are from Lorton. And I'm like, wait a minute, because they live a 5-minute walk from South County. So I'm like, I'm trying to put two and two together, but they're just not connecting. And I'm like, this is interesting. And it's just there's just so much that I've observed and taken note of, and that I know all of us here have taken note of as well. Just the boundaries in our county are absolutely absurd. Because and it's just, you know, segregation on a whole new level, but, you know, we don't want to talk about it because, you know, we want to play the respectability politics. We want to be politically correct. We want to, you know, accommodate for everyone. And just the one thing I hate about accommodating my thoughts is like, I'm not going to make you comfortable because, you know, just because like you don't agree with me or because, you know, you're a part of that as well. If me talking is making you uncomfortable, I'm so sorry, but you're a part of the problem and you need to acknowledge that and you need to do something about it, you know? Because I mean, that's the reality. And like one thing, like I just feel like knowledge, like being cognizant of everything is so important, you know. And I was talking about this, especially like on social media, like clearly, evidently, I am not Black, like as you can see, you know. So that means like I'm not, these issues and everything that's going on, they will never ever affect me, or at least from my experience, they have never affected me the way it does a Black person. And these issues, although they make me angry, they will never make me as angry to the extent of a Black person, because I'm not seeing, you know, like my community dying out. I mean, I do, but there's not to the same extent as, you know, as like a Black person would. And I just think like just being cognizant of that, being aware. And I know one thing, a lot of like, especially in like the Latinx community, like we like to say, you know, this, and they say it in Spanish, but I'm gonna say it in English because I'm pretty sure a lot of people who are watching, you know, mostly speak English. They say, you know, my fight is your fight. But one thing I started, you know, changing about that was like, you know, like my fight is not your fight. Because I mean, there's a lot of differences. Yes, there are a lot of intersectionalities, but like this current one, that's not my fight. But I will fight as if it were my fight, you know? So yeah, I just wanted to add that to the conversation real quick.
Yeah, no, and I mean, Lisa and Rithika, feel free to chime in if you'd like to. I mean, this is the introduction of another vocab term from today's stream, intersectionality, right? That there are, you know, yes, we have people of different races. And by the way, it's a little bit of a tangent, but it's highly unusual that in the US, we have to think in terms of race. Introducing another vocab term real quick, social construct. The fact that a social construct is essentially something where as a society, we have made up a thing. And that thing we have believed to be inherent to who we are as human beings. So we think that race, like there are kind of boxes that we all exist in and identities that we take on that are our race. And that's what makes it a social construct. Obviously, given the realities of today, we have to talk in these terms because there are discrepancies along racial lines. But if we were to be an ideal society or even just a proper society that treats people equally, we wouldn't always have to, race wouldn't be the first thing we see in a human being, right? We're on all shades and tones of color and we can treat each other with dignity past race, but that's also different than claiming to be colorblind, right? Because we live in a society where whether we like it or not, we have to acknowledge race because the policies we have been set up on that basis where that social construct, which in an ideal world wouldn't exist, is something that has played a role. So that's social construct for you. And intersectionality is where multiple aspects of these, you know, either constructs or identity features. So whether it's race, religion, ability, age, gender, whatever it is, there's intersectionality amongst those. So let's say, you know, African Americans are discriminated against in particular contexts. Maybe people who are younger are discriminated against in certain contexts. And then you have women who are treated a little bit differently too. So that build all of that on top of each other, there are ways where that ends up being exacerbated and the outcomes are different. But also intersectionality comments on the fact that we are all connected to George Floyd, to Breonna, to Ahmed, you know, in different ways in seeing ourselves in them too, and being able to empathize to that degree. That there are issues that if civil rights and civil liberties are under attack for us as a country, we're all under attack. And that this being what the standard we're accepting is of our communities means that we're all a part of this and that we all have to act. So just wanted to make sure I highlighted that piece as well for us, that just because it's not, you know, your issue or it won't impact, you know, your dad directly, having these policies in place, it's also just a matter of time, right? Because originally in this country, we didn't consider Irish people white. We didn't consider Italians white. There's been a progression of what we have come to accept over time. You know, whether it's the Chinese Exclusion Act, whether it's so many things that have occurred in our history where there's been the other and we haven't accepted the other until they become part of the norm. So just thinking about how all of these policies are things that we shouldn't be standing for regardless, right? Kelly, you spoke as a Latina. There are certainly intersectionalities with the struggle, right? With encounters with whether it's power, in this case, law enforcement. So I just want to make sure that, we think of it in a way where we're all invested in that same cause, because ultimately it's a statement about our community and the condition of what we believe is, are the values we uphold or stand for. So I want to make sure we, Kim mentioned, I want this to be productive, right? So we've been breaking down the issues. We wanted to give some level of understanding and certainly have empathy towards those folks who just don't know where to start, just kind of want to do the right thing and have the right orientation in their heart to help and empathize, but not necessarily sure what the language is for it or feel it might be inaccessible. So Kim helped us out here with a list of do's and don'ts, factors to consider as you try to communicate on these issues, and join the social media conversation that is occurring, which of course is not fully just like the only action we should be taking, but certainly is a step in the right direction. So Kim, please take it away.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just, actually, I think, okay, Abrar, forgive me but I think I've been seeing Rithika and Lisa been actually wanted to say something for a little bit. So I actually want to give them the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all good. I want to give them the opportunity to hop in real quick before I jump in with that.
Thank you. Thanks, Kimberly. I actually just didn't want to interrupt the flow, but two quick things to sort of speak to sort of the other people out there who aren't necessarily as exposed to the same things that Kim, you, and Nathan have been exposed to, because I'm certainly one of them. I've been lucky enough to have been sheltered from that. And first thing I want to say is that it's possible to not think of things as compartments and organize yourselves by race, because in my experience, living in Taiwan, I was the only Indian person there, for miles, but people didn't necessarily treat me as someone completely different, and definitely not in a negative way. So what I'm just trying to say is that it's possible to see beyond these boxes of race and just to see someone as just a normal person. Second thing I want to say is I go to high school at TJ, and we live in a bubble. We live in our own little bubble where we don't really see past anything. To be honest, after moving here from Taiwan, as absurd as it sounds, I did not know the extremity of what the N-word really meant, and that was simply because I hadn't been exposed to that. And so my point really is just that if you recognize yourself to be in a bubble, burst that bubble and actually try to find out, what the real world is really like, and learn from people's stories, hear them out, listen to them, so that you can contribute to your community, even if it's not directly affecting you.
Yeah, thank you. Goes again with the thesis of self-awareness, right? That's at the core of how we begin addressing these issues. Go ahead, Rithika.
One thing I want to add as well is that I totally agree with Lisa in the sense of I've been really sheltered as a kid. So I want to apologize, because I know for me, I've more recently come into this fold of learning what's going on, kind of understanding that there is this difference between what's going on with different communities and different groups. For me, I've always tried to keep it as that I try to see everyone as okay, we're human. That's the first designation I make. I don't try to see people as race. And I think for me, I moved from Kentucky and I came here in 5th grade. It's a totally different mindset. And I think first, I apologize for Kim and Nathan. If I say anything wrong, again, this is me trying to come out of my bubble, as Lisa had mentioned before. And I'm grateful for this opportunity, especially living here as close to DC and as close to the capital that we are, that I'm giving this chance to see things in a different light. So coming back to what I wanted to say about Kentucky, it's similar to you guys said, I went to what was called a ghetto school. I think I never really understood the concept around that name, but it was definitely, I think they had a vibe to it where people were oh, that's where the poor people go, or the not smart people. And so typically there was 3 Indians in the entire school. It was just something different. So for me, I was really exposed to all these different cultures and different backgrounds that I think allowed me to be able to be more open-minded. But as Lisa said, it is possible to open your eyes and see that there is this new world of problems that exist apart from your own self-story. I think one thing that has really helped me this year is like in school taking Lang, we talked about the damaging aspects of a single story. And I know for me, a lot of the problems that say those in the African American community or those that in the Hispanic community face, I definitely don't feel them because I'm not them. Yet I think it's important that everyone tries to understand what's going on and learn to act on those beliefs. Yes, like Kimberly was saying, I cannot pronounce that name. But she spoke about the
Chimamanda Adichie.
Yes, thank you. She spoke about that on the TED Talks, and it was empowering to see that like there is something out there that I don't know, and why don't I know it? I should know it. I live in this world amongst 100 different types of people, cultures, classes, really. I should know what's going on in the world, especially if I'm supposed to be part of that future that makes what we're going to live in. I think it's important to say that like, even though I think one thing I want to concede is that just because you don't understand it doesn't mean you're racist, but what does make you what in this common world term is racism is not acting on what you see is morally unjust or what is obviously unjust happening to those around you. Racism there's a layer of racism where one, you understand that you're racism, and then like, as we mentioned before, those unconscious layers that happen through our policies, through just the way of living just the standards of living that we're in based on your state, based on your community, based on your school. And I think it starts for those younger that are watching that it's important to try and expand your outreach, expand what you're looking at, because these problems happen now and we shouldn't be triggered to start movements as a response. These events should happen just because we know it's happening, not as a response, but as a proactive measure. So that way our kids in our future don't have to repeat the mistakes that we're making now. That's kind of just what I wanted to say.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Rithika. Again, to the point of self-awareness. And at the end of the day, these all should be personal to us. We live in a community where these things exist. Are we okay with that? Are we okay to live in a Fairfax County where in 2013, John Gear was, by the way, Fairfax County, killed at his doorstep for nothing? He had no gun, no nothing. Like, he was an unarmed Black man. Are we okay to live in a county where someone named Natasha McKenna goes killed in our Fairfax County prison? And that we constantly re-elect a sheriff who oversaw that and who to this day, accepts that occurred. I mean, these are the realities we're in. And we're just, again, everyone is complicit. We all go into election day, we look at the ballot and we just, pick the paper that we agree with and we go in and vote for these people. We don't understand that they're perpetuating these things. So thank you, Rithika, for pointing out, that it's personal to us to live in a county where this is happening, and we should want to change this. And the racist piece, right? No one should be, that term can be alienating, and we don't want to target anyone by throwing that. But really, we all have some of that within us, and we have to look to how we're contributing to it. So, and in building, on that even further, thinking of the ways that we may not even be aware, which again, we were approaching this with empathy and really trying to bring everyone in here. So Kimberly's going to help us kind of look at what some of those things are that we may not even be realizing could be offensive.
Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of go into it. So mind you, I just want to make sure like I put it out. So I made this list based on what I believe and also what I heard a lot of people believe. I believe a lot of people will agree with me, but just kind of like a discretionary, I'm the one who made the list. So just kind of making sure everyone knows that. But at first, I just want to also take the time to acknowledge that everyone speaking out and trying their best, like trying to spread awareness. I know everyone means well. So, but this is just like kind of like do's and don'ts for like to kind of from a Black person and kind of just what I believe would be actually helpful and useful and kind of like open your eyes to some certain things. So for don'ts, I'm gonna start with don'ts because I feel as if do's can come like it's gonna bounce off directly off of this. So in don'ts, I think the first one I put was don't spread graphic videos and photos of victims of fatal brutality. So people call it trauma porn. I didn't know that was a word, but people called it that. So I'm just saying the reasons behind this is that showing these final moments strips the victims away of their dignity. And the families of these victims often do not want their family members to be remembered by that graphic image. And also it can be especially triggering to people that this is a reality for. I think a lot of people, they say people need to see this. People need to do like to be outraged by this. And I needed people to just understand that it's mentally distressing for a lot of people, including me. I'm gonna use myself as an example. I'm gonna use my brother as an example. It's distressing. It's harmful. And George Floyd's brother actually said, "My family and I watched in absolute horror as the now infamous and horrifying video began to spread quickly throughout social media. What we saw on that tape left us shell-shocked. A white Minneapolis police officer kneeling directly on my brother's neck, obstructing his ability to breathe. As some officers knelt on his neck, other officers participated and watched. No one took any action to save my brother's life. Those officers would continue to brutalize my brother until he died." So that is a statement from Philanice Floyd, George Floyd's brother. And I thought it just include that was taken from the GoFundMe site that he organized. So yes, we need to show. Okay, so the next one is try to avoid excessively listing out everything that was good about the victim. And people might be confused by that. And they're like, why we should show like why these people were actually good people, why they shouldn't have died. And I agree. I believe that we should show the world who they really are, ensure that their legacy is not tampered with or defiled. But however, if we are become too caught up with proving that these victims were good in our own ideology, our own beliefs, it pushes the ideology that Black people should only be shouldn't be murdered only if they are what we describe as good. Another point, if you're going to be advocating and such, we should not expect praise from it. And this is specifically for our non-Black supporters. It's a wonderful thing that you are speaking out, and do not get it mistaken. We need you. We need as much support as we can get. However, it must be understood that Black individuals, including me, including my friends, have been advocating for years and years and years. And often we don't receive praise. Often we are chastised, we are criticized, and we get accused of being divisive, of being hyper political, of being uncomfortable. So when you put out things or like expecting praise, I think in a lot of people's opinion, you're not doing it for the right reasons. You should put it out because you genuinely believe that you believe in the cause. Not because you expect to get brownie points, but you expect like people are gonna be like, oh yeah, he's really like woke. Another thing, try to avoid strictly performative advocacy. So I'm not saying completely abandon it, because it's important that you make your friends know that you still support the cause, to make it known that you are anti-racist. But examples of strictly performative advocacy is those post this if you support Black lives, and I've seen that on Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, or those chain like tag 10 accounts. And the issue with that is that sometimes people take that as an opportunity to be like, oh, I didn't want to do anything else, but I want people to still like me, so I'm gonna post this, instead of actually posting things that may be like meaningful, like the resources we're about to list, like petitions, those causes that actually will spread awareness. And for Jews,
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, hop in.
Okay, so I just want to say that as you were mentioning some of these like doing it for praise or like these performative advocacies, in the moment, I understand it's a good cause. Like, yeah, if you want to say this is why I'm doing it on those chain links, you mean well, but I think it's important to realize that those can come about these events. Your actions toward it need to be more long-standing, and I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess in the sense of like the way that these are portrayed, it's like a fad. Like maybe for the next couple of months, we'll see this thing go around, and then all of a sudden, if we don't hear anything else happen, it's just going to die down a bit. It's happened before over the past who knows how long, for so many years. These events, it starts a fad. We go, oh yes, and then give it a couple months. If we don't see anything, all right, next thing, what's new? So I think it's important that to add on for the don'ts, just make sure that what you're doing it's more time lapsing, so it like lasts forever, not just like, oh, I'm doing it because this is what I need to do now. This is what we need to do from now on.
Yeah, 100%. And to reiterate, like everyone who's posting those, that's not to like bash and be like, I've had my friends actually apologize and be like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that this was bad things. It's not bad, but it's not the best thing you could be doing with your time. And it's not the best way to show support, because I feel a lot of people are like, it kind of makes the whole movement look like a trend. Like, and in all honesty, there's nothing trendy about this movement. This movement has been going on for the longest time. And it should be kind of like Rithika said, it's not a fad. It should be kind of dealt with a certain type of seriousness and a certain type of like intentionality. I use the word intentionality a lot. We need to be intentional with it. Yeah, happen.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I wanted to add to this because our perception of change is that, you know, all of a sudden someone touched on this earlier, but, you know, someone goes into Congress, puts in a law, that law happens, and then things change. And I just want to shape like our understanding of this, because the civil rights movement, first of all, a ton of stuff they wanted didn't get accomplished. And that took, I mean, for one law, all right, let's just take the Civil Rights Act. That took hundreds, thousands of people devoting their entire lives to that cause, number one. Number two, that took thousands of dollars of, you know, fundraising for institutions, for people to advocate. This kind of change takes years for you to get people on board, to convince them. And this goes back to what we framed this conversation with, where the white moderate, according to MLK, right, is one of the biggest barriers to change, because you'll have policymakers who'll feel, maybe not, maybe this. And even when that law is enacted, the implementation of that and to live up to the ideals of that is a whole nother standard to expect, right? So usually laws are not implemented in all places, and you don't have someone supervising the implementation of the law in every single interaction that has to do with that law, right? And the cost of lawsuits and prosecuting for violations of the law are incredibly high. Most people don't do it, especially if you're a victim of an incident. You don't want to go sue and remember it all and have to testify and prove that it happened. So I just want to give people a sense here, actually from the founding of our country, our founding fathers, if you read, you know, the articles of Confederation and everything that they put forward, it was intentional to have our government to move slowly. There are good and bad reasons for that, so that, you know, things are not so sudden, but a lot of that was to preserve the, you know, powerful people's agendas, right? At the time, it was this whole big states, small states debate, right? And there was this idea that people wanted to have more of a say, and that there was a distrust of the masses, of the people, that the people tended to come up with laws that were just not a good idea, or they don't know much, or they don't know any better. So we need to make sure power is more concentrated, right? Just keep that in mind. Again, when we know the context of our history, we can understand, oh, this was deliberately slow and deliberately for certain voices to have more of an influence than others. And we see this even with things like the Electoral College and all that, right? And that the legacy of that remains. And so when we think of change, to show up for a couple of days in a protest, first of all, absolutely very important. We should do it. It's a public expression of our discontent, and we should never stop that. But the work behind the scenes is infinite. It will not stop. We could spend our entire lifetime dedicated to this cause, and it will not stop. And it's just the reality of our world. Anyway, I just wanted to put that out there to really kind of challenge our thinking on this. You know, one law doesn't change it. These things require so much mobilization and energy and money, resources from the community, skills. That, by the way, this is another area where discrimination is so unfortunate, really. These people could have channeled all of their energies towards positively developing their community, right? Towards institution building, towards production of arts and culture, towards contributions to education and just, you know, our broader society that don't have anything to do with fighting against racism. But that is the reality that we're in. And so there's a compulsion to do that. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there because the pace of change is immense. And as you begin this journey of self-awareness, which by the way, I'm still on and I don't claim to have finished, we will never finish. And that should be our attitude. I just, you know, wanted to make sure we see things for what they are. But go ahead, Kim.
Okay, so we just finished the don'ts list. So in a kind of a more like, since I told you like what not exactly to do, or like what to avoid. Here's some things that we can do to kind of actually, I think I saw my girl Khadija in the chat say substantial actions. So engage in substantial actions. So sign petitions. So there's going to be kind of like listed later on. And I think Abrar, if you can, is there a way that you can like link it in the live
Yeah, we'll
thingy?
include this in the description and we'll have the other students mention them.
Cool. So sign petitions, donate to causes and funds. A lot of I think, I'm not sure if the Minnesota Freedom Fund is still taking things. There's going to be many funds that will need, like, money is an object in these things. So it's important that we donate what we can. Educate oneself. So it's important. I think we have to thank Lisa for compiling that list. We have to become well versed in the history of US and not just the history that's in our curriculum. And I think that's really important. Earlier this year, I was I didn't do it as much because, you know, the year kind of got cut short. But I was able to talk with some members who are fighting for anti-racist curriculum task force. So what that means is actively having people look at our curriculum and making sure that what we are teaching our students is actually historically correct and is intentional in teaching that this is what happens, and also making sure that people know, because I think Lisa brought it up before, like slavery was just taught as a fact. And even me as a Black student, slavery in my head, it was just like, oh yeah, that just happened, because that's just how I was taught it. And the more you actually think about it, when you watch these certain movies, when you read books, you become outraged. And the thing is, we should be outraged by everything. So we need to read books, we need to watch films about this, and we need to do whatever we can to become educated on things that we may not be familiar with. Let's spread awareness about these forms of action to show people how to incite change in impactful ways. So it's one thing for you to know it, it's another thing for you to tell your friends about it. Because you see, you can know about it, but in all honesty, petitions don't work with one person. You gotta get your friends on it. You gotta get your cousins on it, your aunts, everybody you know, and show them that, hey, this is important to me and it should be important to you. Get on it. And for another dude, provide support for your Black friend or just people in general. This is really distressing times. Your Black friends are exhausted. Your Black coworkers are exhausted. Your Black colleagues are exhausted. Mental health is a big issue within the Black community, and very clearly racism does not help that issue. So check on your Black friends, make sure that you see like how y'all doing, how you guys provide support for them, tell them to rest. A lot of us aren't resting well. A lot of us aren't sleeping well. Provide support for them. All in all, this isn't a 1 week situation. It was never a 1 week situation. A lot of people are tired of it. But you know, if they're tired of it now, they're gonna be tired. Racial injustice and justice as a whole will persist after this whole thing settles down. When the riots end, when the protests end, this will still continue. So even after this whole like super like tipping point of a week or 2 weeks, I don't know how long it's gonna last, we must be committed to challenging racism and aggressions in our everyday lives. We need to actively be challenging it. We need to be having these conversations with our families. You need to be calling out your friends with saying racial slurs in any magnitude. I don't care if it's in a song. I don't care if your favorite rapper's saying it. You need to call out your friends. You need to call out your friends about making racial jokes. All those small things we just showed you that pyramid. You need to actively be challenging racism. And we need to understand that racism is systemic and we must actively be anti-racist to counter it. I think what's really nice is what I've been seeing across social media is this saying that like, it's no longer enough to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist. In order for anything to change, you have to be actively challenging racism. So yeah, that's the list. If anyone wants to hop in, I made the list. So if I might have missed some things. If someone wants to talk about it, just hop in.
I just
yeah.
Upon like the performative allyship, because that's what I've seen so much. And I think, you know, like a lot of people are saying like, oh, like your silence speaks volumes, this and that. And so I just want to like elaborate on that. Like, please, if you're, you know, reposting and retweeting and sharing things online, like that is totally okay. But do it because you truly want to contribute to the movement and because you believe in the movement. Don't do it just because you don't want your Black friends to shun you. You know, that is performative allyship. If you feel obligated to prove your allyship on social media, then you're not contributing to the movement. You're seeking approval from the movement. And like, you need to, if you like really want to contribute, like you need to follow through And if you're posting or whatever, you need to follow through with those like posts and those words or whatever in your day-to-day lives. Like, yes, continue to send emails, sign petitions, call, you can sure go ahead, like, screenshot how much you're donating and all that stuff. But in your day-to-day lives, like, you need to continue and like follow through with those actions. So when your parents or your siblings say something, make a racist remark, you need to call them out. When your friends use the N-word, you need to call them out. It doesn't have to be in a rude way. You can simply say, like, I just did this like probably like an hour ago. I was like, hey, like, please, like, don't use that word, and it was a very casual, simple conversation, but it got the point across. When your peers and your teachers and your coworkers, commit microaggressions, call them out. And when you catch yourself thinking a little bit, different, a little backwards, call yourself out. Like, you need to challenge the status quo of not only others, but of yourself. And, and back to what I was saying about, the silence speaks volumes. A lot of people, are online and they're chastising people for, not saying anything, not posting anything, not spreading awareness. Yes, silence does speak volumes, but at the end of the day, you do not know who's truly being silent, because you could be taken apart in these actions in your day-to-day lives. You could be doing it. You could be signing petitions. You could be calling in to your legislators. You just don't feel the need to post it. And if you feel the need to post it, that's performative. That's your performative allyship, and we don't want that, Because the real change is not on social media. The real change starts from within, and it's carried out through your actions. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. And I wanted to make sure we define one of the terms you used, which is on our key terms list for today's stream, which is microaggression, right? So oftentimes people don't even realize that certain things they might say could be offensive to someone. So a microaggression, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's a way of offending someone in a way that is more subtle. So for example, it usually is based on assumptions, right? So you may have assumptions about a community, about a kind of person, and the way you speak is based on those assumptions without you even realizing you've said it. So for example, I'll mention a microaggression that was a huge part of my childhood, when people would say, oh, you speak English fluently. And the assumption is because I'm Muslim, then I am not from this country and wouldn't have the ability to speak the language. There are plenty of microaggressions. Maybe if folks want to chime in with one or two other ones, so a few people can get an idea. Go ahead, Kim, I see you.
I didn't realize you'd be such a good kid. I didn't realize you'd be so smart. Oh, you're so articulate. I didn't realize, just like, oh yeah, it's a lot of different things. There's so many, you hear it all the time. People are just like, okay, yeah, those type of things. And a lot of times, well, unfortunately, a lot of times people don't realize that that's what they're doing, but it is. So yeah, just kind of like those type of things.
And those aggressions can also come in like, sorry.
Tell me that you are smarter than you look. I was like,
yeah.
I was like, oh, so because I'm Latina and because, I like to, dress nicely, like I wear makeup, I'm not supposed to like, care about my schoolwork. And I was just, go ahead, Rithika, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was thinking like, it's kind of like in that mindset as well. Like sometimes you get positive comments. You're like, oh my God, you're so smart. Like it can even be the other way. Like, I know, I don't want to like demean like Kelly and Kim. Some of the things that you guys are saying are the bigger microaggressions, but there's like, I don't think there's a term for it. It's like micro positives, I guess, where you're like assuming someone's ability based on their culture.
Oh,
and that
yeah.
can come in like a negative way, but that could also not necessarily positive, but it's just like, like, you know what I mean? It's like, why would you assume that like, okay, so like this is the general thing that people
You're
use.
Asian, you're supposed to be good at math.
There we go. That's what I was about to say. I was like,
yeah, it's a common one.
So it's not necessarily like, I think a good thing to point out is microaggressions don't necessarily have to be bad. It can also just be a basic assumption on how someone would lead their life or how someone would treat some of their day-to-day activities. That's also one thing. And then Kim, you mentioned how a good thing to do is checking up on your Black friends or on your African-American coworkers and buddies. What is one way that I think, coming from someone who is a bit sheltered, I don't want to come across as like directly addressing this issue. Like, I don't want to say, how's the racism treating you? Like, you know what I mean? There's like certain terminology that should and shouldn't be used. So how would you suggest that people who do want to begin making those steps do it? And I think anybody can pop in. I think this is a good question for us to ask ourselves and the general community. What is an appropriate way for us to start to make these changes? Because there's a lot of subconscious things that we do that, like, necessarily when we do begin to make these changes, like we mentioned before, we don't realize it, but we're doing exactly what we didn't want to do.
Rivika, I just want to first just say thanks for asking that question. It's a really important question. So I think like a way to check up on your friends, kind of like, yeah, maybe like the way you said, like, yeah, don't pop in just like, how's the racism? Yeah. But just like how you would check up on anybody. Ask them, how are you? And I think some people are like, oh, well, a lot of people just say good. A lot of other things I like to do is I like to ask them, like, how are you sleeping? How's life treating you? And then when people say good, don't leave it at that. Don't leave it at good. Don't leave it at good. Because right now, I talk about it a lot. I say, everyone's hurting just a little bit. In some form, everyone's hurting just a little bit. Don't leave it at good. Always ask them, like, get something like out of them. And even though like some people, like, it may not be your closest friend. And if sometimes people sometimes they just won't tell you this. Sometimes it's just like, yeah, I'm all right. Things just a little tough, but I'm surviving. I'm a victim. I'm not a victim. I'm a perpetrator of that. I do that. People ask me, how are you? I'm like, oh, I'm surviving. That's all I can ask for. And they're like, cool, yeah. And it just goes. That's the conversation. But like what I like to do is I like to hit up my friends and be like, hey, you don't need to tell me what's going on right now. You don't need to tell me what's happening right now. You don't need to tell me how you feel. But I express that I'm thinking about them. I express that I care about them. I think like yesterday I sent a couple of my friends this one really cute meme that I saw. And I was like, hey, things are a little tough. I'm thinking about you. If you need anything, I'm thinking about you. And letting people know that they're not alone. That's a big issue. A lot of people feel as if like I think it even sucks a little bit too. We in like four walls. A lot of us who are still at home, like a lot of us who aren't able to go protesting for health reasons, for safety reasons, we're at home and it's tough. It's hard. Making sure that people know that you care about them and that things are tough, and like, you make sure you don't minimize just like, oh yeah, at least it's not that. Oh my goodness, don't do that. But yeah, just express that you care about your friends. They need that. I think everyone needs that right now. And I'm gonna be real, it doesn't even need to be your Black friends. Like, everyone's kind of exhausted.
Yeah.
Send memes, man. I love memes. Send memes. Do that. Like if all else fails, send memes.
Yeah, I think that's what Kim just said. Sorry to jump in also, but I think what Kim just said is so important. I think everyone is a little bit at odds right now. And if there's anybody who comes to mind, just send them a quick check-in. I think that's so important because even all of this is just compounding the already existing COVID issue that was isolating everyone. And so I don't think we can overstate the importance of just checking in with your friends, your classmates, your peers, just a quick, I'm thinking about you. And like Kim says, just emphasize the fact that they matter and that, you know, their thoughts, you're thinking about them. I think that can go a long way.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, even, I mean, psychologically, you know, sometimes folks are feeling the burden of like, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to, you know, and I want to do it right. I don't want to say anything offensive. Sometimes actually just listening is cathartic for people. To have an empathetic listener, you know, for someone to just express how they're feeling or that they're down or that kind of thing, and then to know that someone is listening that cares, can be very valuable. So I just want to put that out there, and for folks not to feel, you know, that they can't do the reach out because they might mess up or say the wrong word, or it's not really about, I think, policing ourselves like that. It certainly is to put the effort forward, but expressions of compassion like what Kimberly and Nathan outlined, I think could be beneficial. So, I mean, with that, there are other ways too, right? So there are the interpersonal relationships, and then as a society, as a community, there are steps we should be taking. Nathan's going to help outline some of those for us.
Okay, yeah, so perfect connection, but so all of these links that I will be verbalizing will be edited after the call in the description, so you guys will have access to them. But I just want to start the conversation about ways that you guys can start to make a difference. We were talking a little bit about how change is slow and it takes a while. And these are the things that you guys can be doing. You can be encouraging others to be doing so that we can work to make sure that change exists. So firstly, you can visit blacklivesmatter.com.cardco slash hashtag repetitions for the full list of things, but we're going to cover just a few of the prominent ones, I should say, right now that are circling. One is the petition for justice for Breonna Taylor. The petition is for some charges to be filed to arrest the officer that killed Taylor, the family to be paid for damages for the death, and the Kentucky governor, Andy Beshear, to speak on behalf of Breonna and the appointment of a prosecutor to investigate the Louisville Police Department. And that's at www.change.org/p/Andy Beshear, Justice for Breonna Taylor. Now, the other petition that you can sign, the other petition that I would like to point out is the petition for the justice of George Floyd, which includes more information. You can visit www.justiceforbigfloyd.com, and this includes more information about George Floyd and the incident. Signing the petition will send a message declaring justice for Floyd directly to County Attorney Michael Freeman, who has the power to arrest and charge the police officers responsible for the murder. And you can also text 55156 with the words below to send a link to the petitions. And that is, you can text 55156, either Floyd for the petition for George Floyd, enough for the petition for Breonna Taylor, or justice for the petition for Ahmaud Arbery. And I think Rithika will go into more detail about donations.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nathan. So the next thing that people can do is try and donate things. So for example, we have the George Floyd Memorial Fund, which is at www.gofundme.com/f/George Floyd. It is the official GoFundMe page to support the Floyd family, organized by Mr. George's older brother, organized by George Floyd's brother, Philonice Floyd. There's also the fundraiser for Ahmaud Arbery, which is at www.gofundme.com/f/I-run-with-Maud. It's organized by Arbery's best friend in support of Mrs. Arbery, Ahmaud Arbery's mother. And there's also the Minnesota Freedom Fund, www.minnesotafreedomfund.org/donate. It pays criminal bails and immigration bond for those who can't afford to as we seek end discriminatory, coercive, and oppressive jailing. And that is their official description. Their Instagram as well is also at MN Freedom Fund. Additionally, you can also donate and support the Black Lives Matter movement. That's a pretty long web link, so I'm not going to read that out, but it will be in the video description. Their description for that is: we appreciate your support of the movement and our ongoing fight to end state-sanctioned violence, liberate Black people, and end white supremacy forever. Donate to fuel our campaign for justice. And next, I think Lisa can take it off with other resources, so if they want to learn more.
Right, so these are the following resources that I'm going to be talking about is basically like, if you find that you can't financially help with the situation there, it does not stop there. There are plenty of resources to actually learn about, what is going on, and just by making yourself aware, you're helping. And by spreading these links so that everyone can sort of inform themselves, their own households at that minute level. So first off, we have the American Civil Liberties Union and their racial justice program. So I'm not going to read out the entire URL, but it's pretty long, but we'll be posting that in our description. But this organization basically aims to promote racial equality through litigation, community organizing, and training legislative initiatives and public education. So this is core because this is addressing, the systems that are educating each of our students and how policy is being made. So the foundations of the rules of our community. Next, we have again, this is as part of ACLU's, the same organization I mentioned earlier, and they're Fighting Police Abuse, a community action manual. So this is absolutely key because if we might think that, we're nowhere near Minneapolis, but that could have happened here in our community. And so it's pretty much crucial that every community member knows how to properly address, or when faced with the situation of police abuse, how do we address that? And this manual will basically walk you step by step in terms of understanding how to do that. Next, we have the NAACP. as we had Ms. Hampton, and she talked about what the organization did, and this organization has stood the test of time, and I believe, like, out of all of them, you know, if you're going to really dive deep into one, you should dive deep into the NAACP. The Racial Equity Institute, which provides workshops on helping develop racial equity leaders. So this is, again, informing you, helping you understand how to become a leader in your own micro environment. And finally, we have Mapping Police Violence, which provides a real-time international map of police violence statistics and graphs. So this is bringing the facts to you, bringing everything that people have observed, and just letting you observe the situation at a purely objective and quantitative level. So all of these links will be posted in our description, and I believe Kelly will be going over a few projects.
Yeah, I'm another just continuation of what Lisa was talking about, and for the sake of time, I won't be saying the URLs, but they, again, will be posted in the description. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Race Forward, which is an organization that conducts research on racial justice issues, brings attention to racial injustices in the media, and provides training on advocacy and action. The next one is the Advancement Project, and this one supports national and local movements for racial equality, and their goal is to strengthen existing social movements and help achieve policy change. Third, the National Urban League, which provides economic empowerment and educational opportunities for the underserved in America. And then Black Lives Matter, which, you know, is the big one, but which is the global organization in US, UK, and Canada, whose mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. And just a quick note, Black Lives Matter also has a local chapter called Black Lives Matter DMV, which people can sign up to join the movement locally and be involved in multiple creative ways. So.
Yeah, thank you guys for outlining that, and it's kind of a lot. So, you know, for folks, I wanted to make sure it's in the recording. We'll add it to the description so you know what these organizations are. In terms of like baby steps, next steps right now that you can do, the clear one, you know, one of the ones that was mentioned was either the local chapter of the Black Lives Matter movement or the NAACP. We do have a Fairfax County NAACP that meets regularly, hopefully after COVID in person, but that, you know, recently had a town hall and education. I also want to just comment on some of the things locally, right here, right now, FCPS, Fairfax County, what can you do? So for one, one thing that I would encourage you to look at also, I mean, post-COVID most likely, there's something called the DC Area Educators for Social Justice. They're a group that goes out to the community, does workshops. I would highly encourage you to either attend one of their workshops or even potentially take their training to develop your own awareness and understanding of social justice. I'll say this too. We touched on the legacy of racism and history and how it's impacted current policy conversations. So I'll ask of you this. One, with the political season or like the political cycle, to be very aware of what's happening. Right now, we actually have a primary that's coming up June. I have to double check the deadline. Actually, Kim, if you'll pull it up from our previous QuaranSTREAM notes, I'd love to point that out. That's an opportunity for you to voice your to cast your ballot, but to voice your position on where you want the future of this community to go and who you want to be in power over us, and whether their platform is representative of what we want our community to be. So that's one. On top of that, you know, there's this opportunity to vote in this upcoming election. If you are an eligible voter, obviously you have to be a citizen and all that. If not, though, regardless, to show up to a local party meeting, show up maybe virtually for now. But there are, you know, our local parties have meetings on a regular basis and they shape the platform. I'm telling you as someone, you know, who now is what, like 6 months into a position, a lot of what happens is actually even before people get elected, because it's the relationship that's built and the issues that are brought to elected officials' attention. So when we think of power and folks who end up in power, for you to have a voice early on and have a relationship with these people before they get to where they are is extremely important. So even just showing up to one of these meetings, I was someone who was a beginner years ago, and I just showed up to one of these meetings and slowly I began to understand how this process occurs and what the issues are. With our school system in particular. So we talked about boundaries. Number one, this has been an issue. I'll say this for the school board specifically. It's just been delayed over the years because whenever it's touched, it leads to uproar and people don't want to touch it. Why? Because school board members are an elected official and they want to keep their seat. And if they upset enough people, they're not going to win their reelection. They don't want to stir the water. Now we're lucky to have a new school board. I think we're headed in the right direction, but keep an eye out when these things come up. Be a voice, even if it's just on social media, for the side of equity. So for reevaluating these boundaries and really taking a look. Every time we do it, we get people who are very vocal on the other side, and there are rarely voices who fight for equity on this issue. Number two, curriculum. So Kim alluded earlier to a piece about a committee that's currently working on some of that or looking at it. As we move forward, anyone out there who's hearing this right now and who is interested, I will partner with you to start a working group where we can start looking at the best practices from across the country, from well-researched work that shares the narrative of all the people in this country, whether it's Native Americans, African Americans, Hispanics, whatever it is, so that we can teach our children the proper understanding of our country and where we're headed. We are part of the reason when we talk about MLK, everyone has a good respect for him. Why? That's taught in K through 12, at least in our county. I mean, there are a lot of places in this country where it's still not the case. But we can further develop our curriculum here. And that is a step you can take immediately to help with the research and developing some of that so that we can work with staff in an effective way to move that forward. In addition, the achievement gaps that we see in our county. One of the things that's constantly an ongoing fight is universal pre-K. Universal pre-K is a very clear step that brings some of those achievement gaps, that makes those achievement gaps smaller. And we see that communities of color, lower income people are disproportionately impacted by these gaps, right? So we can start right there to be an advocate for universal pre-K and budget conversations that come up, maybe not this year, or at least maybe not this cycle because of what's happening, but to keep that on your mind as something to advocate for in the coming budget cycle as we plan for the year after that, post-COVID, to think about what we need to set up in our community here. If you are in education yourself, to try to make that available to folks who are maybe of a lower income background. If you have a preschool or if you're a part of that kind of institution, maybe to allow a couple of students who otherwise wouldn't have entirely afforded it because the institution is functioning anyway. And that's a step that we can do in the right direction for our communities. So those are some of the things to think of. I want to work actively, proactively on these challenges. If you have an interest in making a difference in our community, work with me. Oftentimes, with policymakers, there's a number of reasons why certain things don't happen. Political will is certainly a piece of it. Sometimes, lack of courage, but there's also an abundance of issues. There is an overwhelming amount of work. And I always like to say, change happens in partnership. I'll give you just one picture. As a school board member, we work pretty much full time for all these different issues. And we don't even have a staff person who can help us with policy or anything like that. So we rely on the community. We rely on you, people who are passionate, who are willing to do some of the advocacy and the research to work alongside us so that we can make the right decisions for our community. So that's a potential step forward if you want to take a bigger, more active kind of leadership role in some of this. And then to constantly be that voice, going on a more micro level. We started this conversation by talking about self-awareness and improvement of ourselves. I want to go back, remembering again, to really sit down with yourself and be critical. And when I say sit down with yourself, there are tools like journaling, self-critique, asking people for feedback that can bring us all. And I say this, by the way, as someone who does this myself and who will continue to do this. I'm not exempt of interrogating myself and learning more about these issues to be a better community member and someone who's more empathetic towards people who are different than I am and who have had different life experiences. We talked about history. So learning more of that and understanding what's shaped our county to be what it is. We tried presenting you guys with some of that today. We hope you will continue the pursuit of that journey. I'd recommend The People's History, Howard Zinn, for example, or The Case of Reparations by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Those are examples of literature that is well researched, but will give you a different perspective. And not assuming that what we learn in K through 12 is the be all, or that we know everything about American history from that, or even the right facts. Number two, we talked about media, just recognizing what is the news you consume, what are the influences or the interests associated with those sources, and how do they influence your thinking as a result? Are they profit driven? Because maybe they are. And maybe when things are profit driven, they just put up what people consume, right? So we have to really interrogate those assumptions. We talked about family and our own culture, beginning to look inward and think of the ways that our own upbringing may have influenced our thinking and our comfort level with certain things. And finally, we talked about psychology, gaining a better understanding from an academic and informed perspective as to how human nature operates allows us to better see things for what they are as they unfold before our eyes, and allows us to not be those people who are complicit as massacres and injustices occurred in our past, but to be agents of change who are proactive because they see it, because they're willing to see it and they are willing to act as a result. So I pose the question to ourselves, as we listen to those around us, right? When we hear disagreement or when we encounter what we may be quick to cast judgment on, like if someone says something and we're just like, ooh, that's just too much, like you're being extra, or that can't be the case, that's not a fact. To ask ourselves, why is it that these people believe this? What trajectory in their life circumstances that I could have encountered myself that would have led me to the exact same conclusion or to the exact same feeling, right? So what if my own brother or mother or father or sister had been in this circumstance? How would I react? How would I behave? So to ask ourselves these questions before we cast judgment on even the things that appear the weirdest to us as we come across them moving forward. So, and finally, for those of us with some power, maybe you have a lot of followership on social media, maybe you hold a high position somewhere in some company, to be mindful that empowering others also means elevating others, right? So as we advance, I tell myself this every day, and I hope that the students being here is a part of this, but as we advance and as we move forward, to pull people up with us who may not have otherwise had the opportunity, to be that person in that person's story that believed in them and invested that extra time and effort to build them up. That's something we can all do in our capacities, depending on where we're at. We can also stand with justice. And what I mean by that is when we see these things under attack, to be amongst the voices who speak up. And I'll wrap by saying this. I didn't say this whole call, but, and I've been trying to think of the best way to maximize compassionate good, not anger-based good, but a compassionate, empathetic, compulsion to change. I was beat up by a cop in Fairfax County myself. And my emphasis towards all of this, to all of you, is coming from a place of really trying to find that as people who want to emerge as leaders, for you all watching who want to take that step and really build us towards a future that is better, we have to find that inner compassion within ourselves. We have to correct of ourselves, and to have that clarity to lead us forward. Because I myself would never have believed that such a thing could happen in this county. I really did. I drank the Kool-Aid and believed that we lived in a county that is amazing and it's perfect and it doesn't have these issues. And our county is amazing in many ways. We're doing a lot better than a lot of other areas. I don't want to diminish that. A lot of our public officials really do their best and believe that they want to give a fair shot to everyone. But sometimes not everyone knows the nuance necessary to do that. Or there are other complicating factors like political interests and different things that are human nature again. So I say this hoping that we can, one of the things I mentioned to our student leaders in one of our calls as well is we have to keep hope alive in the dismay that we are in the difficulty that we see. We have to continue to believe in a better future. And as we put that vision in front of us, we first start with ourselves. Again, that's our thesis from today, to begin with our own self-education and self-awareness, self-critique, and then to take the necessary steps in the long term, because we're in it for the long haul, because this struggle is years and years of work to get that productive fruit out of it, so that we can truly improve the lives of those around us. So I hope that with all of that, we can take away something. If you nothing else from this, take one thing that you're going to do. Write that down. Hold yourself accountable. Hopefully, we all can hold each other accountable with even just that one thing. Don't let this be a wasted, several minutes or a couple hours that you were with us here today. We can all do something in the right direction, and I hope that we'll see the blossoms of that in our children, in our grandchildren, and in the coming generations, if we're lucky enough to live to see the accomplishments of that. So thank you guys all for tuning in. Someone wants to say something. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I think a good way first of all, I just wanted to applaud everybody, especially those that are with me today, both watching indirectly and those that are directly on this call, those that are across this country doing their work. Like, I applaud you and your work. Thank you for everything that you're doing and for joining, for helping those that really need to be supported during these times. And one thing I wanted to say is that I even wrote it down in my hand so I wouldn't forget. But there's this one I don't remember what to call it, philosophy, Plato's allegory of the cave. It is our duty for those of us that do understand what is going on to help those that don't come into the light of the reality. It's one thing to live in this bubble of, okay, as Abrar was mentioning, I didn't believe that my county would be, that this could happen in my county. I didn't believe that this could happen where I'm from. Just making sure that while it is your duty to stand up, it is also your duty to make sure that you're educating those around you who may not necessarily have those resources or just aren't willing to make that fast-paced change. Make sure that you're always working towards, from now until forever, that you're always working towards making that slow but sure change and growth within everybody, because we're always evolving. And I think that's something that I just wanted to point out at the end, that just like,
yeah. And if I may tack onto that as well, I one of the things we take away from this, right? When I said stand with justice when you see it, if we hadn't had these recordings, I think someone said this earlier, we may not have even believed this happened, right? 100 Black people could come tell us that that was their experience, and we'd be like, nah, come on, you're exaggerating, right? And I will tell you from my own personal experience, guys, there were people today tuning into the NAACP briefing on what's going on. There are people who post day after day articles about racism and why we should tackle it. And they're the very same people who, when I had my encounter with the police, were naysayers and were people who were like, come on, you had to have done something. You aggravated the police. You must have been a threat somehow. And I was like, half of this guy's size and like had nothing that I could have done. And the police, by the way, wrote the letter telling me that there was nothing I had done that could have caused that, right? A year later, of course, is when I received the letter. But nonetheless, I say this to say that again, that self-interrogation, because we can never imagine that. I mean, I'm sure that those people don't even recognize the hypocrisy in their own action or in what they're saying. And I'm sure that there are times when I do things like that I'm not as aware of. So I just want to put that out there, right? That allyship is a real thing. It requires a lot of effort within ourselves first to think of the ways that we perpetuate or at least not advance the causes that we are verbally saying we want to support, so that it's not just lip service and that it's true action. So with that, I don't know if anyone else wants to kind of offer their final thoughts. Kim, Nathan, Kelly, I see you're unmuted. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to Abrar, specifically to you, because honestly, without you, I don't know how we could this is how you use a platform, y'all. Like, Aurora has been the one person I know that if I go to her with a complaint or issue or anything like within the county or whatever, like, I know she'll act upon it. I know she'll take it into consideration. She'll listen, even if she doesn't agree, she will listen. Like, from QuaranSTREAMs to, she's here like helping a bunch of Hispanic organizers. Like, she's always doing something, and she knows how, it's genuine, I see it's genuine help. And especially us all being students, no one really gives us an opportunity to come out and speak and to come out and help and work and organize. But she's given us that space, which is, I think, is so amazing, because we are students of this county. You would think that we should have a say, but quite frankly, for the most part, we don't. But Abrar has really made sure to include everyone, and so I just want to say a huge
oh my God, super unexpected. Thank you, Kelly. And it's this small, it's this much in what needs to be done. So we need to continue fighting the good fight. And I look forward to, having my kids be inspired by y'all when you're in positions like mine and greater. So that's the goal for whoever can break my records first. But no, I appreciate you saying that. That's very kind.
I'm gonna just like briefly. Yeah, I just want to also thank everyone who viewed this and everyone who's gonna watch this afterwards. Because I think a lot of people have the idea like, oh no, like this is a Black thing, this is this. But honestly, it's not just the Black problem. And if we're actually thinking about it in a sense, racism isn't the Black people's problem. It's a problem of years of people who have brought this upon us. We didn't start this, but it somehow ended up being our job to end it. So I just actually want to thank everyone because I just want to, people who are actively on it right here. I see some of my friends. I actually asked them, I was like, hey, can you, if there's anything that you guys could do for me right now, just hop on this and listen. And I'm gonna say personally thank you because I think a lot of people, Rithika just said humanity's problem. Thanks, Rithika. And I think for me, I think everyone who knows me knows that I've been in a slump for like the past week. It's been, I'm not shy about how, like my mental state. People always see me as like the super strong person, and it's not. And I'm gonna just say publicly too, it's hard to be strong. People don't need to be strong all the time. Your friends don't always need to be strong. Your Black friends cannot be strong all the time. And I also, so just seeing all these people here, like just the support made me feel kind of better because it was really tough. It was, this past week has been really tough on me, been tough on my siblings, my family. It's been rough. So I just want to say thank you for everyone who actually helped put this together. We were on a call on Saturday, which y'all don't see behind the scenes, y'all don't see it. Saturday, we were on the call. We had actually something completely different planned for today. We made all this happen literally yesterday, like at this time yesterday, we was working on this. So just like, thanks to the QuaranSTREAM team, thanks for everyone. And also listen to kids. Listen to kids. That's something people forget. Listen to them, because chances are we got something good to say.
One last thing with that kid part, like just it's just adding on to the praise that I have for Abrar. Like not like, you know, we have this like thought, like, you know, political figures and whatnot, like they're so untouchable and they're like adults and, you know, they're like, you know, it's kind of hard to convey what we want to say and we have to be very professional. But Abrar is like the one adult, I guess, that I've like, I'm sure I'm putting the time, but like, you know, just consistently hasn't, she's never like, she makes us address her by Abrar, like by her first name, you know, like it's not Miss, like, you know, her last name, like, no, it's Abrar. And like, she really makes us feel comfortable, like our thoughts are, you know, valid, like what we have to say is important, and she makes sure that our input, you know, is like, you know, taken into account. So it's like, it's just one of those things, like, you know, where it's just like when I tell people about Abrar, I'm like, this girl is amazing, and it's 'cause she is, you know. I'm just okay, yeah.
You're so sweet, Kelly. No, it's because you all are amazing. It's people don't see it. It's ageist. When we can talk about racism, we can talk about discrimination of all kinds. It's ageist. Y'all have so much to offer. Y'all are the future, and you're clearly the ones out here building and trying to do what we're doing. Even the Black Lives Matter activists, who are they? They are young people. Most of the people who are out there protesting, right? So I mean, it's just a matter of time, y'all. We're gonna get there. We're gonna get into, you know, positions of power. We're gonna set the agenda. People just gotta wait. We're not gonna wait. Anyway, any final thoughts, y'all?
Last thing I just wanted to say is, like, first off, I couldn't agree with Kelly more. And I think people really do need to follow like Abrar's lead in terms of just treating people as individuals, regardless of background, age, whatever, and just frankly, like, realistically talking to people without looking for political gain or, you know, whatever else. The last thing I wanted to say is, like, actually quoting Abrar from earlier in this call, politics isn't a hobby. It's something that all of us are just invested in, and it's something that we're all living on a day-to-day basis, because regardless of if you think it affects you, it affects you. Whether it doesn't right now, it will down the road. So it's the best thing is just to learn about it, and, you know, even if you don't want to go all out and immerse yourself, at least at the very minimum, be self-aware. And, you know, I can recognize yourself that, you know, sometimes you make mistakes, sometimes you're a hypocrite. I can say that I sometimes am. But at least making that recognition is the first step, and treating politics as something that all of us are a part of is the second.
Nathan?
Yeah, I think this is so important. And I, again, echo the sentiments of Kelly and Lisa. and thanking Abrar for just giving us this platform, this space. She's one of the leaders, the adult leaders that I've just grown to look up to in the short time I've gotten to know her. And it's one of those things that's insurmountable and I don't get to find anywhere else. So I thank her for that. And I think two things that I take away from this whole conversation I think is so important that I hope that you take away. One of them is appreciate the effort. We all want change and we are all working for it. And when you see someone, going that extra step, I'd say that positive reinforcement is the best reinforcement. So I think we should all come together and, appreciate the effort and appreciate the work that's being done so that people are continuously willing to put in the work. And then the second thing I hope everyone takes away is that we're now talking about at the very end is that young people are the future, and young people, it's our world that we're going to have to inherit. It's not like our generation is going to have to deal with all of these issues. And so I'll exit with a quote, and it's what young people lack in experience, they often make up for in idealism. So I think that, the more you give us space, more people like Abrar, leaders like Abrar give us space to, voice our concerns. I think the better the future is because it's issues. So I thank her for that. And I thank all of my colleagues here on this call for, taking the time out to speak up and being heard. And I thank everyone watching, like Kim said, for caring enough to, make the effort.
Thank you, Abrar.
Yeah, no, you guys, this is so unplanned, by the way. Like, I did not expect this, and I really appreciate it, and certainly inspires me to fight even harder. I even on my campaign noticed, how at the end of the day, even when I would feel in a rut or whatever, like Kim said, everyone has those moments. It was y'all who inspired me more. I'm like, these kids, like, they're counting on me, and we're building all this great stuff together. So I'm grateful to you guys. I'm grateful to I'm looking forward to seeing the potential of you guys actualized, and I've already started to see it unfold. So with that, I don't know if anyone has final thoughts before we close out here. I did want to point out today's stream is longer than we've ever been, and that is intentional. That these conversations are important. There's no reason to silence or cut off the stream of consciousness that we are having and the great information that I think we offered today. We didn't even get to questions today in the live feed. So we will follow up, I hope. I'm gonna take a look at some of the comments and questions that came in. We can answer them at the beginning of our next stream. As y'all know, we do Thursdays and Sundays at 7. Next session will be on special ed, which is another community, of course, the disability community. Ableism is a real thing, right? So we can learn more about that in our next one, and we'll tune in every Thursday and Sunday at 7 p.m. So thank you all for tuning in. This is our first step, and hopefully you take another step after this call. Bye, everybody.